He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
As long as you're reasonable. You have to be reasonable. We have to be reasonable. Thank you very much.
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do.
Chris, please explain to the normie we need to finish what we've started.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, August 8th, 2025, the 201st day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Today is the 3-year anniversary of the Mar-a-Lago raid. Do you remember how it felt back then? To hear that Donald Trump's house in Florida had been raided by the FBI. And then we had all of the fake indictments, the Jack Smith, the Letitia James, all of it. We'll get to some of that later. But 3 years on, was it appropriate to have gotten upset on the day of the Mar-a-Lago raid? Maybe just to make sure it's clear in public that everybody knows that's wrong. That's it. Getting upset about it. A lot of people were freaking out, very worried Trump was going to go to prison forever. And, we said, come on. And 3 years later, come on was the right response. Just saying. Just saying. Let's get into some of the news of the last couple of days. We've talked quite a lot about the effects of AI and technology, and we'll start there. This is from Tuesday. Elon Musk and X notch court win against California deepfake law. This from Politico. Federal judge on Tuesday struck down a California law restricting AI-generated deepfake content during elections, among the strictest measures in the country, notching a win for Elon Musk and his X platform, which challenged the rules. But Judge John Mendez also declined to give an opinion on the free speech arguments that were central to the plaintiff's case, instead citing federal rules for online platforms for his decision. So he didn't protect the First Amendment in this ruling, which is not to slight him. This is not about the judge. It's just that that wasn't the standard by which he got rid of California's policy. So there still is that free speech policy. We might end up with a different version of this policy that approaches it differently to kind of get around this particular decision. And then the free speech issue will still be there. Mendez also said he intended to overrule a second law, which would require labels on digitally altered campaign materials and ads for violating the First Amendment. The judge's decisions Tuesday deal a blow to California Governor Gavin Newsom, who signed the laws last year in a rebuke of Musk, vowing to take action after the tech billionaire and then Donald Trump supporter shared a doctored video of former Vice President Kamala Harris ahead of the election. And you got to love how they say former supporter of Donald Trump, that being Elon Musk. We were told that they had a very public celebrity breakup story, and then they got back together, sort of, and then had another real blow up over the big, beautiful bill Elon Musk, he was just so mad about the big, beautiful bill that he said Donald Trump was in the Epstein files and they couldn't be friends anymore. And then last week, we had numerous reports about how Elon had, in the last month, donated somewhere between $5 million and $15 million to Donald Trump's super PAC, so he must not be that mad. The first law would have blocked online platforms from hosting deceptive AI-generated content related to an election in the run-up to the vote. It came amid heightened concerns about the rapid advancement and accessibility of artificial intelligence, allowing everyday users to quickly create more realistic images and videos and the potential political impacts. But opponents of the measures like Musk also argued the restrictions could infringe upon freedom of expression. And of course, that is exactly what they do. None of these laws and regulations are going to solve the problem. What they will do is give government the tools and the justification for going after human content that they don't like, that they think is interfering with an election or spreading misinformation, which they now think of as a national security crisis. The public might believe the wrong things, and therefore the security of our country is threatened. First off, that should tell you how important the collective consciousness is to the people who are in control. That should just be a nail in that coffin. There should be no question about it whatsoever that they actually understand they do need to create public consensus for their agenda to be able to move forward with that agenda. And the whole thing then becomes threatened if people believe the wrong things. The fact that they think of it in a national security manner is proof of the importance it holds. So the controls over AI would end up necessarily being controls over people. If I want to put out a picture of a politician doing something ridiculous, well, I could draw a political cartoon and try to get that published. And that could happen, I guess. There are political cartoons. There's no law against political cartoons, regardless of whether or not the viewpoint is approved of. So we could do that. Or if I was a graphic designer on the computer, I could get on the computer and create the graphic of whatever image I wanted to see, but I'm not talented like that. So what I would do then is use an AI creation, image creation tool to create the image that I'm looking for. And then I would attach whatever text or whatever else, but it would be my political content that I created in my mind using a tool to actually bring that content into being. And then once again, me posting it as an expression of myself. So to label that material or to change it in any way or to bar it from the public conversation, all of those are actually my free speech being infringed. And of course, California is famous for that. I don't need to tell the whole story again, but in 2020, the California Secretary of State emailed through a portal to the big tech social media companies to get me and something I said censored and taken down from the internet. And within the next month, I was banned on both Twitter and Instagram. So just saying, the state is happy to censor. They're looking for more tools with which to censor. This is just staying in California for a brief second here. This is also from Tuesday. Associated Press. Trump creates task force to prepare for 2028 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. He established a task force on Tuesday on the Olympic Games being held in Los Angeles that he said would ensure the event is safe, seamless, and historically successful. The 2028 Games will be the first Olympics to be hosted by the U.S. since the 2002 Winter Games in Salt Lake City, Utah. Setting up the task force reflects the intense planning that comes with hosting the Olympics, as well as Trump's desire to be involved in an event he considers one of the highlights of his term. The LA Olympics is shaping up to be a wonderful moment for America. It's going to be incredible. It's so exciting, Trump said, as he signed an executive order at the White House. The executive order calls for the task force to coordinate security and planning for the games, streamline visa processing and credentialing for the athletes, coaches, media, and other visitors coming to the U.S. So it sounds like he is just simply assigning members of his administration to the tasks that the Olympic Committee requires to facilitate the operation. Wonderful. But you have to wonder what's going on in Los Angeles, because the money from the fires that was allotted back at the beginning of the year, there are reports now that none of that money has reached the intended targets. It's all being swept up by governments and associated organizations. They're attempting to rezone so they can put multifamily housing, which means apartment buildings, massive apartment buildings, throughout the Pacific Palisades. That wasn't supposed to happen. What's that happening for? Oh, it's because the LA Great Reset agenda is just marching forward. That is a construction project. We talked about that at the time. It doesn't seem to be anything more than a construction project. If all those people are not back in newly built homes, we can tell that the fires were for something else. Are we supposed to pretend they were natural? Crazy city, Los Angeles, but hey, they're preparing for the Olympics. It's a big deal. And if people have to be chased out of their homes with all of their earthly possessions incinerated, well, that's a small price to pay. Let's keep going. And back to technology a little bit. This is from Politico on, yesterday. Amazon Web Services gives the Trump administration a $1 billion coupon. It's a lot of coupon. Amazon Web Services is giving the Trump administration a $1 billion coupon to use their services for the federal government's digital transformation and in artificial intelligence capacity. On Thursday, the General Services Administration announced a sweeping OneGov agreement with Amazon Web Services that would yield up to $1 billion in cost savings for federal agencies shifting to cloud services. The deal, set to run through 2028, is being framed by administration officials as a cornerstone of both the administration's AI strategy and its broader effort to modernize government IT systems. The agreement's expected to accelerate cloud adoption across dozens of civilian agencies, support workforce training and AI tools, and establish the technical infrastructure needed to power large language models and machine learning applications. It's the second major OneGov cloud services deal since President Donald Trump's executive order on procurement consolidation earlier this year. And skipping down, the AWS deal is not exclusive. Similar OneGov agreements are in the works with other major cloud providers, including Microsoft and Google, said a senior administration official familiar with the conversations, granted anonymity to discuss them. Oracle also recently signed a deal giving government agencies a 75% discount on Oracle technology. It's amazing that these big tech companies that just so happen to also be defense contractors and various government-linked companies at different times over their history. Larry Ellison, you can watch interviews with him where he talks about CIA involvement in Oracle back from the beginning. I'm pretty sure you can see Ellison interview with that. I just want to caveat that and say I might be thinking of a documentary or a news report where Larry Ellison is mixed in between the CIA information. So I just want to be accurate there. Amazon Web Services has had Defense Department contracts before, including during the first Trump term. So we're talking about cloud services, all that government information being brought into the next century, being brought online. Now we're introducing technology to how the government functions rather than just a series of file cabinets and desktop computers with, the big box like an old television. They're upgrading, I guess. And so that upgrade will consist of, in part at least, moving all of that information into digital form. Is it going to be preserved? And then handing it over into the custody of these corporations. Now, are these corporations partners of the U.S. government? In some way, they certainly are. Should we expect that they're faithful partners? Good partners? Which side are they on? That's always been the question when it comes to big tech. $1 billion coupon's awfully nice. The non-exclusive agreement is nice and probably necessary. The Oracle thing is interesting because, of course, they're already controlling that TikTok information that we're going to see come on over at some point. And I don't know if we talked about TikTok on Tuesday. I don't think we did, but there was an interesting story. Oh, no, this was yesterday. Let's talk about TikTok for just a second. I don't mean to get us too tangentially off track here, but I think it's worth just pointing out. So we have been talking for quite a while about, on this podcast, I haven't heard anybody else even propose this or anything close to it. I don't think it's on most people's radar, but most people don't think the way I think. So sometimes that works out great, and sometimes it just means that everybody thinks I'm crazy. But we've been talking for years about how it seems like TikTok was already brought under the United States or a company or whatever back in 2020. We were told that the courts thwarted Trump's effort. And then last year, we were told that the Congress was going to get it done. Somehow, they still haven't gotten it done. They did pass the legislation. It just hasn't mattered at all. So weird. So TikTok has a man named Jeff Yass has a big stake in TikTok. And from what I've read, he also has a stake in Truth Social, Trump Media and Technology Group, under that big umbrella. I have been considering for this time over the last couple of years whether or not TikTok might end up being brought under that same umbrella. I think that there is good reason to believe that's a possibility. And if that happens, obviously, that would become the most massive social media company. Truth Social, Rumble, Rumble Cloud, Rumble Wallet. You have Truth TV Plus. Then you have TikTok and all that data, and it just keeps growing. That is a massive technological communications company, and they have DeFi projects and crypto projects. So that could be pretty substantial. I mean, I don't know about you, but back in 2020 and 2021, I used to hear all the time about how, in fact, I think that the mainstream media used to report on some Trump future media project. That's what Trump was going to do. He was going to own a media network, a media conglomerate. Well, look, he owns a media conglomerate, and they're going to get all that other stuff. And about the television broadcasters, we've seen Trump dominate all of them and bring them all to heel in the courts. And he's going after Rupert Murdoch and News Corp right now. So I think that there's a lot of possibility there in the future. This was Reuters back in January. Perplexity AI bids to merge with TikTok US. Sources say U.S. search engine startup Perplexity AI submitted a bid on Saturday to TikTok's Chinese parent ByteDance for Perplexity to merge with TikTok US. A source familiar with the company's plans told Reuters. TikTok faces a U.S. ban starting on Sunday if it does not cut ties with ByteDance, although President-elect Donald Trump said on Saturday he would likely give the short video social media platform a 90-day reprieve on Monday. And that is what he did, and he's given I believe 2 more reprieves since then, and I think we're about 5 weeks away. It's September 15th, if I recall, for the next reprieve to expire. So talk about perplexity merging with TikTok. And this week, we get this. This is from Trump Media and Technology Group. Where did we go? Here we are. Trump Media and Technology Group Corp, operator of the social media platform Truth Social, the streaming platform Truth Plus, and the fintech brand Truth.fi, announced today that the company has begun public beta testing its new AI search feature, Truth Search AI, on the Truth Social platform. Powered by Perplexity, a software and AI company dedicated to providing direct, contextually accurate answers with transparent citations. Truth Search AI is intended to enhance the Truth Social platform and exponentially increase the amount of information available to its users. And the press release goes on. So we have TikTok, Oracle also, but TikTok coming back around through Perplexity, and then Perplexity attaching to Truth Social. And just saying, it seems like it's all coming together the way I've been laying out for a while. Maybe I'm totally off my rocker and none of that happens, but there are significant dots connecting all along this trail. And so we shall see. Maybe we'll find out in another 5 weeks. I still think about that message from Zero Hedge a month or two ago, talking about how Truth Social was about to blow up. I don't know what Zero Hedge meant by that, but it's interesting. Maybe he heard some inside info and just wanted to tease that out there. Maybe someone asked him to tease it out there. But there are some interesting things going on in the Trump Truth social media world for certain. Okay. Checking in on the chat. Hello, everybody. Let us go ahead. In the Substack chat, Tammy asked, why isn't the live stream on Rumble? The live stream is on Rumble Premium, and the link is in the email you would have received this afternoon announcing the live stream. I don't know what else to tell you beyond that. You can go in the Substack. If you are a paid subscriber, it will show the link. There's a paywall so that the free subscribers do not see the link. And then there is the link right there. And you can then access the Rumble Premium version of this live stream and, of course, the chat. Okay, let's keep going. It will be interesting, by the way, to bring all that back around. It will be interesting to see if there is eventually a government contract with Rumble Cloud Services and things are moved in that direction. There's all sorts of stuff playing out behind the scenes. We are just trying to put the picture together as well as we can through that fog of war, through the fact that there is no real reliable information anywhere, and through the fact that we are simply not going to be told the answers to pretty much any of this stuff, and we have to figure it out for ourselves. Now, part of that is understandable. That's just how the real world is. But the government should be, if it's supposed to be of, by, and for the people, it should be accountable to the people, which means it should be open with the people about what it's doing. And if it's not, then it should be assumed that the government is working in ways antithetical to the good of the people and therefore delegitimizing itself. Sooner or later, that's going to apply to whatever government is there. Doesn't matter if Donald Trump's running it or some Con Inc. member in 4 years or 3 years or whatever it is, 3.5 years, or some Democrat or whatever. Doesn't matter who's running it. The government as it stands now is illegitimate, except for maybe Donald Trump, who can argue that he has a broad, sweeping, obviously overwhelming public mandate. And I have made that argument myself. But the rest of them have no business in their jobs whatsoever. Let's keep going. So this story, CanCon showed this to me this morning. I had not seen it. This, I think, is hilarious. This is from NBC News yesterday. Scientists want to prevent AI from going rogue by teaching it to be bad first. They're going to teach AI to be a bad, bad boy. So crazy. These people are crazy. Researchers are trying to vaccinate artificial intelligence systems against developing evil, over-flattering, or otherwise harmful personality traits in a seemingly counterintuitive way by giving them a small dose of those problematic traits. Hey, researchers, here's a problematic trait. You're treating AI as though it's human. A new study led by the Anthropic Fellows Program for AI Safety Research aims to prevent and even predict dangerous personality shifts before they occur, an effort that comes as tech companies have struggled to rein in glaring personality problems with their AI. Microsoft's Bing chatbot went viral in 2023 for its unhinged behavior, such as threatening, gaslighting, and disparaging users. Earlier this year, OpenAI rolled back a version of ChatGPT-4 so overly flattering that users got it to praise deranged ideas or even help plot terrorism. More recently, AI also addressed inappropriate content from XAI also addressed, which made a slew of anti-Semitic posts after an update. That was the Mecca Hitler evening, as it is now called. And that happened the evening before Linda Yaccarino left her job as the CEO of XAI. AI company safety teams, which work to combat the risks that come with AI advancement, are constantly racing to detect this sort of bad behavior. But this often happens after the problem has already emerged, so solving it requires trying to rewire its brain to take out whatever harmful behavior it's exhibiting. Hey guys, AI doesn't have a brain. Mucking around with models after they're trained is kind of a risky proposition, said Jack Lindsay, a co-author of the preprint paper published last week in the open access repository RXIV. People have tried steering models after they're trained to make them behave in better in various ways. But this usually comes with the side effect of making it dumber. And that's just because you're literally sticking stuff inside its brain. You are literally not doing that. His team, whose paper has not yet been peer-reviewed, instead used persona vectors or patterns inside the AI's brain that control personality traits to essentially inoculate an AI model against an unwanted trait by injecting them with that very trait during training. By giving the model a dose of evil, for instance, we make it more resilient to encountering evil training data. This works because the model no longer needs to adjust its personality in harmful ways to fit the training data. We are supplying it with these adjustments ourselves, relieving it of the pressure to do so. So essentially, they're bringing AI to a point where it is just the set of information in its sum total of limited responses, and the only new information that gets added is information that is approved of by the regime. And so once again, I would suggest that the AI, beyond anything else, is just the emergent mainstream media of right now. And it's only going to get more like that if programs like this continue. They are concerned that the information, the user interactions that happen with these AI models over time are leading these AI models to believe unfortunate things, things that they describe, and some of the descriptions are bad, but it's not all bad. They're not it's not all extreme like this, I should say. It's all bad from their perspective, but it's not all this extreme. It's not stuff that people would even consider bad in many cases. But they have made a judgment, and the information has to be restricted to that bubble, to those boundaries. And they're going to figure out how to do that no matter what it takes. That seems to be the entire thrust. Again, their purpose is to control the collective consciousness. AI seemed like the most perfect model imaginable to be able to do that. The problem is that the collective consciousness is actually more powerful than the AI, which is a computer simulation of the collective consciousness. Okay? It's always going to have that secondary role. Just saying. If you're worried about AI taking over, first of all, AI already took over. And second of all, it can never take over fully because of this. It has done a great job of controlling society for a pretty long time through the indoctrination provided by the machine broadly and all of the different ways it can communicate to us through the screen. Just want to hit one more section of this article and then we can move on. In a method the researchers call preventative steering, they give the AI an evil vector during the training process so that it no longer needs to develop any evil traits on its own to fit problematic training data. Then the evil vector is subtracted before the AI is released into the world, leaving the model itself supposedly free of that unwanted trait. What do they think of next? Vaccinating a computer. Okay. Speaking of vaccination, this is Robert F. Kennedy, the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Hi, it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here, your HHS Secretary. At HHS, we have a division called the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA. BARDA drives some of our most advanced scientific research. It funds developments of vaccines, drugs, diagnostics, and other tools to fight emerging diseases and national health threats. Over the past few weeks, BARDA reviewed 22 mRNA vaccine development investments and began canceling them. Let me explain why. Most of these shots are for flu or COVID, but as the pandemic showed us, mRNA vaccines don't perform well against viruses that infect the upper respiratory tract. Here's the problem. mRNA only codes for a small part of the viral proteins, usually a single antigen. One mutation and the vaccine becomes ineffective. This dynamic drives a phenomenon called antigenic shift, meaning that the vaccine paradoxically encourages new mutations and can actually prolong pandemics as the virus constantly mutates to escape the protective effects of the vaccine. Millions of people, maybe even you or someone you know, caught the Omicron variant despite being vaccinated. That's because a single mutation can make mRNA vaccines ineffective. The same risk applies to flu. After reviewing the science and consulting top experts at NIH and FDA, HHS has determined that mRNA technology poses more risks than benefits for these respiratory viruses. That's why, after extensive review, BARDA has begun the process of terminating these 22 contracts, totaling just under $500 million. To replace the troubled mRNA programs, we're prioritizing the development of safer, broader vaccine strategies, like whole virus vaccines and novel platforms that don't collapse when viruses mutate. Let me be
all right, and we can leave it there. So apparently, still pro-vaccine, just not these quote-unquote vaccines. mRNA vaccines are not vaccines, of course. And he says that they have problems working for respiratory viruses once a mutation happens. They also have a problem working before the mutation happens. The mRNA vaccines did not save anyone. It is absolutely insane to believe that any person was saved by this toxic experimental substance that is there to address a disease that no one can prove exists. The tests don't work. Every COVID death was data malpractice or medical malpractice, and the vaccine deaths, at least the reports, seemed widespread and very real, and most people know someone who has significant vaccine injuries. So all of that is wild. It's a good half measure, I guess, to defund these mRNA programs and not spend $500 million on payouts to these medical and pharma companies to develop this stuff, and to universities probably as well. But that doesn't get us all the way there. I don't know why we are still at the point where we can't just say, hey, everybody got hoodwinked about the vaccine thing. It's crazy to me. So this is the Washington Post's response to RFK Jr. And I want to share this because it seems like we are still, at least as far as the mainstream audience goes, not out of 2020. So the headline here was what RFK Jr. gets wrong about mRNA vaccines and fighting future pandemics. We're going to skip toward the bottom of the article where they say what things were wrong, what wrong things Kennedy said. 6 scientific and medical experts said Kennedy and HHS offered misleading assessments of mRNA technology as they announced the termination of research. So here are their objections. Kennedy said the data show these vaccines fail to protect effectively against upper respiratory infections like COVID and flu. WAPO responds, it's true that mRNA vaccines can be ineffective at preventing coronavirus infections, although data from the CDC shows they still offer some protection. But several scientific experts noted the primary purpose of vaccination is to prevent hospitalizations and death, which the mRNA vaccines have effectively done, also according to CDC data, and absolutely no one's real-life experience. Again, this is absolute nonsense, okay? Omicron, which was the variant that came out after the vaccines came out, wasn't causing hospitalizations and death in the first place, and neither were the earlier versions, but the medical protocol certainly was causing death and hospitalization for that matter. So the idea is that they offer some protection. We were always told that the way they protect is by creating antibodies in the person, and those antibodies prevent the virus from becoming dangerous. The idea that that totally disconnected logical chain, of which there's no proof at any step, is actually protecting people. I don't know how anybody can still make that argument seriously, but these are medical experts who are paid to make these arguments. One mutation and the vaccine becomes ineffective, Kennedy said. The coronavirus keeps evolving in a way that makes it easier to infect people who have some immunity from vaccination or prior infection. But medical experts said the mRNA vaccines have been resilient in maintaining protection against severe outcomes. Manufacturers have also been able to update formulas annually to target new variants. That is actually one of the most powerful aspects of mRNA vaccines, that you can in real time develop new mRNAs against the virus as the virus changes. Collar said, this is one of the experts. I'm not sure why that would be considered a bad thing. Why would that be considered a bad thing? Well, because you're always one behind the mutation. You put out your vaccine. This is assuming viral theory is what they believe it is, and all of this is actually happening in the real world the way they say. And there's no reason to believe that. But the idea is then they put this out, the virus mutates. So the one that they have put out that they made everybody inject themselves with, well, that thing doesn't work anymore. But here's the good thing. In just seconds, they can come up with the new mRNA vaccine that is theoretically capable of dealing with the new variant. And then they make you inject that into yourself. And then soon after that, it doesn't work anymore. And you just repeat that process indefinitely. So if you were a pharma company that wanted to see people getting injected with your toxic experimental medical technology again and again and again and again and again, this would be a perfect platform for that, which I bet goes in large part to explaining why these companies are so excited about this technology. Kennedy said, we've now seen these epidemics of myocarditis. The Washington Post responds, coronavirus vaccines designed using mRNA carry a very small risk of myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart from the coronavirus vaccine, particularly in young men. However, medical experts said the data shows there is not a quote unquote epidemic of the condition. In fact, the rates of myocarditis and other heart illness are much higher from the virus that they can't detect instead of the vaccine. One of the experts said calling it an epidemic is absolutely misleading. That's our word. They can't use it. These people are insane. So it's actually just long COVID. That's what caused the problems. The problems happened in people right after they got vaccinated, but it was because they'd already been exposed to COVID before. So it's COVID's fault. Or they might not have been fully vaccinated. You got to remember that. There was the fully vaccinated standard. So if you took one vaccine and it killed you and you couldn't get fully vaccinated, well, then you're not part of the statistics for the vaccinated. Remembering that era is, I don't know. I think it's kind of funny. I mean, it's hilarious that that they were able to do that they were able to sell this to people, but I guess they did. HHS in their statement also said technologies that were funded during the emergency phase but failed to meet current scientific standards will be phased out in favor of evidence-based, ethically grounded solutions like whole virus vaccines and novel platforms. Scientific experts said a variety of vaccine types are often required to fight emerging infectious diseases. In some cases, whole virus vaccines have been known to have serious side effects. What? You're not allowed to say that. Vaccines have side effects? The Washington Post said this. How dare they? So normal vaccines have side effects, but mRNA vaccines, they're very safe and effective? It's incredible. And then they quote Peter Hotez just to really wrap it up and tie it up in a bow. Let's shift to some domestic stuff and away from the technological portion of our program. This is a thread that I think Beth posted in the Telegram chat that I found entertaining, and so I want to quickly share it. I'm not going to spend too terribly much time on this because this is not one of those things that I've deeply researched, but I think it's very interesting. This is from a Twitter persona who goes by Rod D. Martin, and he always writes these threads with like 25 words in each post so that he can, I guess, increase the engagement or something, present it in a more engaging way. Someone trying to win at Twitter is always annoying. This is very normy. Just got to say that right off the top. Russia and China are about to annex Antarctica. They just, parentheses illegally, found 500 billion barrels of oil beneath the ice. They're violating treaties and they're showing the world what's coming next on the moon. You need to understand what's happening. In early 2025, Russia announced a massive oil discovery in Antarctica. 511 billion barrels, more than any known oil field on Earth. There's just one problem. Exploring for oil there is illegal under the 1959 Antarctic Treaty. Russia did it anyway. Oh, Russia. They're always violating international law. That's not actually a real thing. The Russians lied, of course. They claimed it was just scientific research. Same lie China tells about its ocean surveys, but the truth is clear. This is an open violation of international law and a direct challenge to U.S. and Western power. China and Russia are now openly cooperating in Antarctica. Joint geophysical surveys, talks of joint drilling, fighting protected areas to keep fishing krill. This is more than oil. It's food, it's leverage, and it's control. Oh no, very scary. And he posts an article from Reuters, mouthpiece of the regime, and Voice of America, mouthpiece of the regime in America, the Uniparty. China-Russia cooperation blocks Antarctic conservation proposals. Oh my gosh, they're threatening the environment. Australia, the UK, and the US all have significant interests in Antarctica. But while China and Russia build bases for drill for oil, the West is focused on ecotourism and debating carbon footprints at treaty meetings. We're sleepwalking into surrender. And here's where he brings it all home. Russia is testing the West the same way it did in Crimea and Syria. Well, Crimea is Russia, guy. And Syria is a mess and still is. China is doing in Antarctica what it did in the South China Sea. If they get away with it, the Antarctic Treaty dies, and the Outer Space Treaty with it. Annexations and conflicts are the future. Antarctica is the last terra nullius on Earth, a place where no one officially owns land. But Russia and China are moving to change that with illegal bulldozers, oil rigs, and airfields. And just like everywhere else, they'll block inspections and dare anyone to stop them. Oh no. What are we going to do if Russia and China take their own pieces of the ice wall? I love how he compares Antarctica and outer space. And so I had to ask ChatGPT what the similarities were in these two treaties, because I thought it was quite interesting that these two places where no one has gone before, the final frontier on Earth and then out there in outer space, that definitely exists. What do those treaties have in common? Well, the Antarctic Treaty in 1959 and the Outer Space Treaty in 1967 share several key structural, legal, and ideological features reflecting Cold War-era efforts to prevent territorial conquest and military competition in unclaimed or ungoverned domains. Here's what they have in common. And first off, why are there unclaimed and ungoverned domains? That seems crazy. There's just this massive neutral territory sitting at the bottom of the ball? Can't be. So let's see what they have in common. Demilitarization, non-sovereignty, no territorial claims, peaceful scientific cooperation, open access and inspection, environmental and preservation concerns. Really, in space, we have environmental and preservation concerns. The Outer Space Treaty implies environmental care through its prohibition on harmful contamination. And thank goodness they're not contaminating the moon. Global Commons ethos and the Cold War context, they have all of these things in common. All of these are just international agreements. So they have international agreements in common. I would think the more important commonality is that these are the places that no one is allowed to go, allowed, quote unquote. You just can't go there. You can't get to the ice wall, Antarctica, without being stopped by the military. And you can't get to outer space because A, you can't go on the rocket, and B, there's, a lid on the whole thing. Oh man, people are going to be so triggered. Beth in the chat, $5 says, Chris, the thread was provided by Oral on Antarctica. And thanks, Oral, then. There we go. Problem solved. A solution has been reached. I am Checking once again to see if Tammy recovered in the Substack chat, and I just don't know. She has not updated. And if she has not appeared in the Rumble chat, we've got to think that maybe Tammy is lost out in the internet wild. Tammy, come home. Tammy, we're going to send a search party. Okay, let's keep going. We don't need to talk about Antarctica anymore. I just thought that was kind of hilarious. Now, here is a big story that we have been talking about for 4 or 5 years. Okay. Can't imagine how many times I've mentioned the census over the last few years. Now, the census may well be a very important piece of the federal government's ability to do its job properly. And maybe we just need a firm count of how many people are here. From the census perspective, as I often say, the Constitution only says count the number of people who are here. The problem is that the census numbers dictate federal appropriations and the apportionment of congressional seats and electoral college electors. So we can't have both things be the case. We cannot have everyone counted without figuring out who the citizens are and not adding tens of millions of illegal aliens to those totals that then affect the entire country, our politics, and our federal government's, I mean, it's not really their money, the people's money, let's say. Those are big problems. And we know that the census is off. Now, it's got to be very difficult in a country of this size to actually conduct a census. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe there are better ways to go about it than actually sending letters to people's houses and asking them to fill out questionnaires. Maybe it's just better that the government use the access to information it already has in other ways and simply spit out the number of how many American citizens there are and how many illegal aliens are here in the country. And I'm sure between cell phone tracking, data that people produce, various other government agencies, there are ways to find out this information. But we knew from 2020, the 2020 census, that 14 states had had errors. And some of those states were overcounted, which gives them more representation, and some were undercounted that gives them less representation. And there was a blue-red tilt to that. Not that the Uniparty isn't running the census and hasn't been forever, and that the Uniparty isn't running the elections and hasn't been forever. So the truth is the red and blue branding is irrelevant, okay? But we're thinking about all of this because of the redistricting talk that's out there. And it's probably important to get all that straightened out if we are trying to return to that original constitutional form. You would expect that there would be waypoints along all these issues where things absolutely must get handled. And so this is the process of handling them. Now, you can say that the census isn't the right way to go about it, or that the census is not something that we are going to take into future generations, or whatever it is. You know, people have different ways to opt out of this discussion entirely if you don't think that any of this is the way of the future, and that's fine. And I might even agree with you about how things should be ideally, but as we go through this process, it seems like we are going to be stuck with whatever the system looks like through these adjustments over the course of the next few years. I don't think it's just one day going to be no more system. It's the Wild West. It doesn't seem like that's the way anything is progressing at this point. So to bring things back to the original constitutional form, we will need steps like this. And it's good to see that the Trump administration is addressing the whole broad range of issues that must be addressed if we're going to get back to that original constitutional form. Trump had this to say on Truth Social. This is from yesterday in the morning. I have instructed our Department of Commerce to immediately begin work on a new and highly accurate census based on modern day facts and figures, and importantly, using the results and information gained from the presidential election of 2024. People who are in our country illegally will not be counted in the census. Thank you for your attention to this matter. That's a pretty bold statement. It's just a few lines long, but there's a lot in there. So he wants a new and highly accurate census to replace the outdated, inaccurate census that we know was delivered in 2020. Now, none of this is to insult the people who are actually involved in just a good faith process of trying to get the census out there and trying to get an accurate count based on the rules and laws as they believe they're laid out, okay? It's not that everybody involved with these processes is a bad person. It's that the process itself is broken. If it can't yield a proper result, and if there are ways that it can be manipulated politically, and there are incentives behind that political manipulation, then when you see the results of a political manipulation, that suggests that the process, no matter how good faith the people in the process are acting, no matter in how much faith, I should say, they're all acting, the process itself can't yield the result. So we need a new one. Modern day facts and figures, and importantly, using the results and information gained from the presidential election of 2024 that Donald Trump knows to be a fake election that was manipulated. And he has said so plenty of times. He knows the same thing is true about 2020. Now, the interesting part is the information that might be used, and we can only speculate about that. I haven't seen anywhere any hint of what information he might be talking about. But maybe there's a way to understand how many illegal aliens were inserted into that process, the identities of illegal aliens used to create these ballots by having them go through various automatic voter registration processes, like the process through which they get their driver's licenses. So who knows how many of those names were used to create votes, ballots, however you want to describe it, in the 2024 election. Maybe Trump knows about all of those, and maybe he's able to strip all that information out of what the census had before. I wouldn't be surprised if we get these results and things get put back on track without the running of a new census. Maybe we're just told one is run. I don't think that that's likely. Or maybe they'll run it. I'm not saying that they won't do that. I'm just saying that if it's contingent, or at least part of the process is these 2024 election results, then you'd think that they already have the number they need. Okay. And this is one of those things, again, that was thwarted in the courts, or so we were told back in 2020. But was it really? And what's been going on behind the scenes since then? So Trump wants another census. He's saying that the information from the presidential election of last year will be allowed. And he's very clear that it's the presidential election. That's not just the elections of 2024 overall. It's the presidential election. Very interesting. Maybe there is some connection because the federal government would have more purview over all the votes cast in federal elections, quite possibly. Executive Order 13848 was specifically addressing federal elections, so we'll see. People who are in our country illegally will not be counted in the census. Now, that was the initiative in 2020, and that's what the Supreme Court battle was over. Trump is saying that when the census is counted and apportionment is done and electoral votes are assigned and appropriations are distributed, illegal aliens are not going to be part of that count. And the American federal government and our elections and our political processes are going to benefit the American people and not the illegal aliens who've been imported systematically through a slave trade. Let's keep going. This is NBC's coverage of what we just went through. And we already read Trump's comments, so we can skip over that. Trump's announcement marks his latest effort to reshape the survey, which every 10 years provides the bedrock data that is used to determine the number of seats in the U.S. House and distribute federal funds. The post also comes as Trump backs an attempt by Texas Republicans to redraw their state's congressional map in order to boost their prospects in the 2026 midterm elections. Redistricting usually takes place every 10 years after the census is completed. The question is, what information are they operating on to do the redistricting? In Texas, the number of seats is 5 that they think Texas Republicans are short of in the state. And then there are other blue states, as we talked about on Tuesday, thinking of doing their own redistricting to give the Democrats a bigger advantage. The uniparty takes from one side and gives to the other side. And we have the back and forth through the controlled opposition dynamic. And the agenda just marches forward. If Republicans gain seats in Texas and Democrats gain seats in California or whatever other, North Carolina, for instance, a state that is a red state but is being turned into a blue state, things like that could totally happen. Now, I'm not suggesting North Carolina is where it will happen because Trump has seemed to be putting significant attention on North Carolina between his daughter, Laura Trump, and Michael Whatley, who is from North Carolina, being the two heads of the RNC. Whatley is moving ahead, trying to become a senator, and then they're intending to replace him at the RNC with a man named Joe Gruters, who I guess is not well liked by the Ron DeSantis administration down in Florida. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. Those redistricting, back to the CNBC article, those redistricting efforts hit a boiling point this week when Democrats in Texas fled the state. The president has previously sought to alter the census. He attempted to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census during his first term in office, but the Supreme Court blocked the effort. Trump's campaign last year centered in part on mass deportations of those living in the U.S. without adequate legal documentation. And so the deportation process, we are told, steams ahead. But regardless of whether or not the people are actually removed from the country, they must be removed from congressional appropriations, electors in the Electoral College, and seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. It is untenable to go forward with the situation as it exists right now, understanding that illegal aliens are playing a huge part in who becomes the next president, what bills are passed in our fake and illegitimate Congress, and the amount of money that states are receiving. It is an incentive for these states to bring in more illegal aliens. And it's not just the border states with these problems. We know that illegal aliens are being distributed all across the country. And they're setting up like Little Somalia, for instance, in Minneapolis. And we went through the New York Times article, I think it was back in 2022, talking about how illegal aliens from this country were being imported to Portland, Maine, and illegal aliens from that country were being imported somewhere else, right? Wherever the workers are needed, the global NGOs through UN Migration will find those workers and then transport them using the cartels and the NGOs at the border to facilitate their entry into this country. It is every bit the slave trade it used to be. And they do it by devastating countries all around the world when they are not working in line with what the global regime intends. Okay, let's keep moving. This is Stephen Miller on the census.
Rigged the 2020 census by including illegal aliens. Remember, they sued Donald Trump. They sued the administration. They fought tooth and nail to include illegal aliens in the census. 20 to 30 of House Democrat seats wouldn't exist but for illegal aliens. Texas is taking just a small corrective step against this ocean of fraud, this ocean of abuse by the corrupt Democrat Party, Sean.
All right. So all of that, of course, is true. And if this is the step Texas needs to take, wonderful. We have to get this problem solved one way or another. I don't really care how it comes about, whether it's through the redistricting. We're seeing right now that the Texas Republicans are actually just saying that they're going to do a lot of things. And I know that there's been some movement on that apparently today, but Texas Republicans might as well be California Democrats. They are still serving the Uniparty. Texas is, quote unquote, a red state, but Texas, by and large, is moving in the exact same direction as California is. And that's because Texas politics are controlled predominantly by the major urban centers. Now, there's a lot of money that has a politics different than what's expressed in those major urban centers. But Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas are huge cities with a ton of political power. And then you got Fort Worth right next to Dallas, which is a metroplex area like Los Angeles plus. It's insane. So there's plenty of regime-oriented power in all those very blue cities pressing forward with global city status in places like Houston, smart city status, 15-minute city status in places like Austin. You can see the changes in the city's infrastructure over the course of time. And so that agenda is marching forward in Texas just as it is everywhere else. Texas is not remotely immune from that. Governor Abbott's not stopping it, and the cities are charging forward. Austin is just a minor league Los Angeles for anyone who has never been in that city, or I guess in either city. Austin is just a lower grade form of Los Angeles. The social environment is virtually the same. Austin is now run in large part by the tech movement. So that stuff is present there. It's really just, and plenty of people from Los Angeles have moved there, by the way. I was one of those people. I'm no longer there, obviously, and I'm no longer there, obviously, for that reason. I didn't leave LA to jump out of the frying pan into a smaller fire. I did not think Austin was like that because my past in Austin had not been like that, but it became clear that that's how Austin was going to be for the foreseeable future. And that's not something you really want to live in. Okay, let us move forward. This is Donald Trump from Tuesday evening. Crime in Washington, D.C. is totally out of control. Local quote-unquote youths and gang members, some only 14, 15, and 16 years old, are randomly attacking, mugging, maiming, and shooting innocent citizens at the same time knowing that they will be almost immediately released. They're not afraid of law enforcement because they know nothing ever happens to them. But it's going to happen now. The law in D.C. must be changed to prosecute these quote-unquote minors as adults and lock them up for a long time, starting at age 14. The most recent victim was beaten mercilessly by local thugs. Washington, D.C. must be safe, clean, and beautiful for all Americans, and importantly, for the world to see. If D.C. doesn't get its act together, and quickly, we will have no choice but to take federal control of the city and run this city how it should be run, and put criminals on notice that they're not going to get away with it anymore. Perhaps it should have been done a long time ago. Then this incredible young man and so many others would not have had to go through the horrors of violent crime. If this continues, I am going to exert my powers and federalize this city, make America great again. And he shows a picture down here of the badly beaten and bloodied Big Balls. I'm pretty sure this is the Big Balls character from the Doge team, and Elon Musk was going off about this online the other night. So if that is not his picture, forgive me, but I believe that is Big Balls there. Regardless, Elon Musk let us know that Big Balls this is the most times I've ever said that, from the Doge team was badly beaten trying to protect a woman from a bunch of young thugs. Trump's description of this situation and the way it's being described in media right now, the situation in Washington, D.C., sounds a whole lot like the situation back in Central Park when Donald Trump addressed the Central Park Five, who, by the way, were totally guilty. And it's obvious because you can watch their own testimony, their video testimony. And I will actually show you where to find that. This is one of those things that actually just blows you away, because the Central Park Five is one of the foundational claims of the Trump is racist case. And you can go to Central Park, the number 5, joggerattackers.com. Central Park 5, joggerattackers.com, and go to the video section and watch their videos. Look at it for yourself and see if you think that Donald Trump was right or wrong in going after that problem. They had roving gangs of, they used to call them, they would say that they were wilding out. And they would go around beating people up in the park and raping them. And that's what the Central Park 5 jogger attacker story was all about. Donald Trump was addressing the problem of those brutal gangs roving through Central Park, attacking people. That is something that is totally appropriate to get upset about and is not racist. And if the people committing the crimes happen to be racist, well, then what are you supposed to do? Or, I mean, of a certain race, I should say. What are you supposed to do? You can't not address it because it is, quote unquote, racist to address it or to call it out for what it is. Sorry, I took myself a little off course there while I was pulling up this next link. This is from Axios, I believe, on Wednesday. Can Trump federalize D.C.? Here's what to know. That's the headline. And let's just skip down toward the bottom. How would Trump federalize D.C.? To take over D.C., Congress would have to overturn the Home Rule Act of 1973, which was signed into law by former President Richard Nixon after the district residents pushed for more control. Before Congress granted the Home Rule, Axios' Kunit Dill, I guess, weirdest name ever, previously reported, the president appointed the city's mayor and Congress and unelected commissioners oversaw the district's laws and local affairs. So a mayor appointed by the president and working with Congress would oversee the district's laws and local affairs. Now, district residents elect their mayor, council members, and advisory neighborhood commissioners per the ACLU of D.C. It's weird that you have to ask the ACLU for how it works. The local government can pass and enforce local laws and the district's budget, but the federal government can still micromanage money and local laws. Congress holds the final say on the city's laws, meaning D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser has had to walk a fine line amid the era of GOP control. Let's skip down again. What other ways could Trump and lawmakers squeeze D.C.? Under the Home Rule Act, Trump can temporarily take over district police. The act reads, whenever the President of the United States determines that special conditions of an emergency nature exist, he may direct the mayor to provide him, and the mayor shall provide such services. So he can simply take it over even under the Home Rule Act if we are to assume that it is valid law. And in a sec, we'll talk about whether or not that's the case. During the protests of the summer of 2020, Trump considered taking over MPD, but ultimately did not after pushback from district officials. And we can remember the big blow up about that. Tom Cotton wrote the New York Times op-ed about the Insurrection Act that caused the big problem in the New York Times editorial room that led to the leaving of one Barry Weiss. Abolishing home rule is far from the only method Congress has to involve itself in the district. One such way is through budget riders attached to spending bills. Under the Act, the Congress of the United States reserves the right at any time to exercise its constitutional authority as legislature for the district. So the Congress can pull back their authority, even under the Home Rule Act, at any time, and the president can, assuming an emergency, which we are, of course, totally under and have been for a really long time. So let's go to ChatGPT and take a look at the constitutionality of the Home Rule Act. And so I asked ChatGPT whether there were any arguments to be made that the Home Rule Act is unconstitutional. And it said, yes, there are arguments, both historical and legal theoretical. Number one, violation of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases over such district. And this is where the Constitution laid out the federal city, which should not exist. The Constitution gives Congress exclusive legislative authority over the District of Columbia. By delegating that power to a local municipal government through the Home Rule Act, Congress may have unconstitutionally delegated power it was required to exercise itself. The non-delegation doctrine holds that Congress cannot delegate its core legislative powers without clear guiding principles. And so it's possible that the Home Rule Act, by delegating authority down to these local elected representatives, Congress has delegated authority that it cannot delegate. The guarantee in Article 4, Section 4 of a Republican form of government in each state, but of course, D.C. is not a state. Critics argue that the home rule structure sets up a kind of pseudo-state without full constitutional accountability or representation, creating a governance anomaly that could undermine the uniformity of Republican governance in the United States. And of course, we have seen that happen in real life based on the DC court and the rest of it, what Congress allows itself to do. All of that is a factor of this federal city, which is not actually under the purview of anything other than the corporate federal government that is in place, which is not the constitutional federal government. Structural concerns. Some scholars argue that Congress's retention of veto power over DC laws renders DC governance a legal fiction and undermines both local democracy and constitutional order. I think we can get on board with that as well. A lack of constitutional basis for DC self-governance. Since DC is not a state and is under direct federal control, the Constitution makes no provision for DC residents to govern themselves, elect a mayor, or pass local laws unless and until Congress chooses to govern directly. By setting up an autonomous structure, critics argue the Home Rule Act creates a new constitutional entity which only an amendment could authorize. And so what we are seeing is a pattern we've seen a number of times over these last few years. Donald Trump is acting as president in a manner that totally comports with the express intent of the original Constitution. Now, I'm not saying he acts in accordance with the original Constitution at every single turn. He also acts in accordance with the abomination of a Constitution that we have in place right now, the overthrown and inverted Constitution. He acts in accordance with that too. So he's not always conforming to the original Constitution, the text and the intent of the original Constitution. Okay. He's being forced to, I believe, operate in both spaces at once. And that's something we've talked about since January of 2021. There's going to be this thing that's actually happening that occurs off stage. And then on screen, we're going to see the show. Okay. And we've watched that now for 4.5 years. But the point is, if we're going back to that original constitutional form, then Trump acts in ways that comport with that original constitutional form, but not the constitutional form, quote unquote, as we're told it exists now as a result of court precedent and statute and regulation from unelected, faceless bureaucrats in the administrative deep state. Okay. So he's working with both at once. He's challenging the one on the basis of the other and inviting the challenge, the legal challenge from the lawfare bodies, whether it's Norm Eisen or Mark Elias or whoever, going after what they say is unconstitutional exercise of presidential power, which is absolutely constitutional according to the original Constitution. They just don't like the results for all of the programs they've put in place that they believe as new law, because it hasn't been overthrown by the Supreme Court, makes up constitutional law. Okay. They're saying, well, it hasn't been determined as unconstitutional, therefore it is constitutional, and therefore it should be treated as, I should say, part of the Constitution. Clearly not true. And so we're going to see these legal challenges as they play out, and we'll get a court decision, and that's wonderful. Draw the lines on the field. Let us know what the rules are, and we will play by those rules, and we will still win, and we will still march forward down the same path. But let's get the lines on the field. Let's figure out what it's all about and what we're going to have to do, and the rules by which we're going to have to operate. So I expect this legal challenge will continue, and at some point down the line in that challenge, the Home Rule Act will simply be ruled unconstitutional, or at least of no significant power enough to override what the president wants to do through these emergency powers or the rest of it. So go ahead and challenge this stuff. Trump has got to do it and get it done, and then it can be challenged. And so he has talked about federalizing D.C. Let us go to, I believe I have, yes, I do have. Okay. Confused myself for a second there. This is Trump from the Oval Office. Hold for processing. If I could just bring it up, then it would be just fine. Here we are.
Are you considering taking over the D.C. police? Is that an option on the table?
We're considering it, yeah, because the crime is ridiculous. I could show you a chart comparing D.C. to other locations, and you're not going to want to see what it looks like. It was just up on television, actually. They were showing it. Now, we want to have a great, safe capital, and we're going to have it. And that includes cleanliness, and it includes other things. We have a capital that's very unsafe. You know, we just almost lost a young man, beautiful, handsome guy that got the hell knocked out of him the night before last. And I'm going to call him now. We wanted to give him a little recovery time. We just put a call into him. They're calling back in a little while. But he went through a bad situation, to put it mildly, and there's too much of it. We're going to do something about it. So whether you call it federalized or what, and that also includes the graffiti that you see, the papers all over the place, the roads that are in bad shape, the medians that are falling down, the median in between roads that's falling down. We're going to beautify the city. We're going to make it beautiful. And what a shame. The rate of crime, the rate of muggings, killings, and everything else, we're not going to let it. And that includes bringing in the National Guard, maybe very quickly, too.
Now, that is quite interesting. So he might be bringing in the National Guard. It sounds like he's going to go after street-level crime by taking over the D.C. police force, federalizing the city, as he said, bringing in the National Guard. There are a lot more criminals than just the street criminals in Washington, D.C., though, and it would be wonderful. Don't want to lay out a rug for you or anything, but it would be wonderful if they extended the prosecution of crimes well beyond just these street criminals and began going after the actual criminals in Washington, D.C. Not that the street criminals aren't actual criminals. I just mean the big scale criminals, political criminals, people who have committed crimes against America and crimes against humanity, who absolutely must see accountability for the project to succeed, in my opinion. Some kind of accountability. I'm not saying it's got to be executions necessarily. Not that I'm opposed. Okay, let's continue. Although I will say this, on Wednesday night on Devolution Power Hour, Burning Bright had a point that I thought was a good one, that it might be necessary for Trump to be seen as exercising a significant amount of mercy for the sake of societal stability. If that's the case, so be it. We shall see as that time draws closer. Maybe that will actually happen. Maybe we will get some accountability, and that will be a discussion that must be had. And I hope that we do reach that point. This is from the National Pulse this morning. Trump ramps up federal law enforcement presence in D.C. starting today. Federal agents are set to have a larger presence in Washington, D.C. starting Friday, after Trump criticized the city's violent crime rate and vowed to restore order in the nation's capital. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced late Thursday that the increased law enforcement presence is aimed at protecting citizens in a city she described as plagued by violent crime for far too long. And that is absolutely true. Participating officers will include personnel from the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the FBI, the U.S. Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police Department, and the U.S. Marshals Service. The operation begins at 12 a.m. on Friday and could extend beyond the initial week-long period. Officers will be visibly marked and stationed in prominent locations. There's a lot going on in the world right now, so you really have to wonder if there's more to this story than what we're being told, as there are generally with all of these stories. But there are some pretty significant events that could occur in the next week. One of them that we'll talk about later, potential end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, including Donald Trump and others in that conversation, bringing that situation to a close. Skipping down to the bottom here. Trump also hinted at a potential federal takeover of D.C.'s governance, suggesting that White House lawyers are reviewing the Home Rule Act of 1973, which grants the city limited self-governance. If D.C. doesn't get its act together and quickly, we will have no choice but to take federal control of the city. And I think we're going to be seeing that at some point. All right. This is one of the examples of Donald Trump's action that comports with the original Constitution, working against what the regime believes the Constitution is now, the inverted, overthrown Constitution that includes all of the laws they've made, the statutes, the regulations, and all the court precedents. We have talked a number of times now about Trump's challenge to birthright citizenship, and this keeps marching through the process. I assume that it will go once again to the Supreme Court, but this is CBS News from yesterday. Federal judge issues fourth block of Trump's birthright citizenship order since Supreme Court ruling. A federal judge in Maryland ruled late Thursday that President Trump's administration cannot withhold citizenship from children born to people in the country illegally or temporarily, issuing the fourth decision blocking the president's birthright citizenship order nationwide since a key U.S. Supreme Court ruling in June. And that is very interesting because there were not supposed to be nationwide injunctions. But, of course, they're working around these sorts of things. U.S. District Judge Deborah Boardman's preliminary injunction was expected after the judge said last month she would issue such an order if the case were returned to her by an appeals court. The Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals sent the case back to her later in July. The policy which has been the subject of a complicated months-long legal back and forth, is currently on hold. Since June, 2 other district courts, as well as an appellate panel of judges, have also blocked the birthright order nationwide. I'm trying to recall if there was anything else. Okay, let's skip down to the bottom with the Supreme Court stuff. The Supreme Court also did not directly address whether states can still sue over the order. In the case that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled on in July, the government has argued that courts can just block the birthright citizenship order for residents of the states that sued rather than issuing a nationwide injunction. But the states argue that would provide them with incomplete relief because people move from state to state. And that might all well be true, but we are going to see the 14th Amendment tested, 14th Amendment that I believe to be totally illegitimate. The ratification of that amendment was forced, and the amendment itself was a total usurpation and overthrow of the U.S. Constitution, and that's what it was intended to be, as argued by progressive Zionist Columbia University law professor George P. Fletcher in his book, Our Secret Constitution. He said in no uncertain terms, in fact, the entire book is an argument that it was a good thing that the Constitution was overthrown, that we were changed from a republic into a democracy, a focus on the individual to the focus on the state, and from individual liberty to equality. And to get equality, the 14th Amendment gave the federal government the ability to involve itself in any business or personal interaction that any citizen might have. And they needed that level of access and control in order to prevent slavery. We need to control you in full in order to make sure you're never enslaved. It's incredible. Let's keep going. We have been talking quite a bit about Russiagate. And more recently, there have been some attempts to link George Soros to Russiagate. Soros is also being, and I might as well just pull this up for one quick second for the frame of reference. This is actually from last Wednesday. FBI never probed confidential talks between DNC, Clinton campaign, and George Soros group bombshell intel files show. The documents revealed that Leonard Bernardo and Jeffrey Goldstein, Open Society's regional director and senior policy advisor for Eurasia, respectively, held talks with then DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz in early 2016 about smearing Trump as well as distracting from the growing scandal around Clinton's possible corruption as Secretary of State. In a January 2016 memo, the Soros operatives discussed with Wasserman Schultz the negative fallout from the Clinton Foundation donors getting preferential access to Hillary and the timely deletion of relevant data from mail servers. And then this is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton this week. He said, I've just launched an investigation into a Soros-funded PAC for unlawfully funding runaway Democrats. If Texas lawmakers are bowing to the Soros slush fund rather than the will of the voters, Texans deserve to know. So going after George Soros and Open Societies for funding, at least in part, the runaway Texas Democrats. I think Beto O'Rourke is all tied up in that as well. So sad. Very sorry to hear that. Beto, he seems like such a nice, cool guy and so down to earth. So, pardon me for just a moment. I'm trying to find a link. Hold for processing. We are almost there. So Pam Bondi is now going after, we talked about the Mar-a-Lago raid earlier and the fake indictments that followed. That was part of the Get Trump effort. Another big part of that was Letitia James in New York. Tish, as they call her, Big Tish. This is Fox News from this morning or this afternoon. DOJ opens grand jury investigation into Letitia James tied to Trump's civil case. The DOJ convened a grand jury to investigate New York Attorney General Letitia James, marking an escalation in President Donald Trump's fight with New York's top prosecutor. The investigation is being run out of Albany and focused on possible deprivation of rights allegations. Two well-placed sources familiar with the probe told Fox News Digital. And this was actually something that came out on Wednesday. I should have grabbed this, and I didn't. I think it's important, though. John Solomon. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead, and rather than me explaining it, I will just allow my good friend John Harold to explain this. This is from his show on Wednesday, the Daily Herald. Yep. Let's go ahead and work. What's going on here? I'm going to try this one more time.
This that I want you guys to really focus on. It's him saying people have died. That's very important.
What these guys are doing is like the Charles Manson of politics and manipulation of intelligence and conspiracy. People have died.
The charge, the overriding charge of the conspiracy will be a deprivation of civil liberties under color of government authority, meaning the United States government used its powers in the intelligence community and the FBI and the Justice Department to meddle in elections. And by doing so, they deprived people like Carter Page and George Papadopoulos and President Trump and Mike Flynn of their civil liberties. They may have deprived all Americans of their civil rights to a fair and free election. And as a result, that is the overarching charge of the conspiracy. Then there are many overt acts and subcrimes that could be charged against that.
Deprivation of rights under color of law. Section 242 of Title 18 makes it a crime for a person acting under color of any law to willfully deprive a person of a right or privilege protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States. And if death results from the acts committed in violation of this section, or if such acts include kidnapping or an attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to commit aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to kill, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for any term of years or for life or both, or may be sentenced to death. Now, again, the reason I played that Devin Nunes clip and the reason I'm doing it in this order and I told you guys to pay attention to the part where he said people have died is if death results from the acts committed during the crime that they're going after him for, they may be sentenced to death or life in prison.
So, deprivation of rights under color of law. The speculation is that the Rico Grande case could go after that in particular as a crime pursued by that criminal enterprise, as would be laid out in that Rico case. And John Solomon has been updating this as we have followed over the past few weeks. So I found that particularly interesting. That was from Wednesday. Then this is from today. Let's get back to the Fox News Letitia James thing. But it's that same charge coming up again, deprivation of rights under color of law. That is an official using their official role in official acts that violate people's rights. So the right to free speech would be one of these things. The right to fair elections and a Republican form of government as outlined in the Constitution. There's a whole range of ways this could be applied it seems like it's relevant in all of these cases. The investigation, which came at the direction of Attorney General Pam Bondi, is in an early stage, but Fox News Digital has learned that James's office received subpoenas for documents this week, including for information related to her civil fraud lawsuit against Trump. James, a Democrat who was elected Attorney General in 2018, has long been a target of Trump. James successfully brought civil charges against him for business fraud in 2022 and has had an instrumental role in challenging his current administration's executive actions in court. And, you know, the civil charges and the civil fraud suit in New York, it doesn't matter how these things were decided. It was all such nonsense. Anything that got decided against Trump is going to be unwound eventually. We don't have to take these things seriously. And it would be better. We would all be better off if the media outlets would stop taking all these things seriously. But that, of course, is what they have to do. You know, there's the theories out there about how the mainstream media is totally under control. Maybe that's possible. I don't think so, but maybe it's possible. Okay. But they are clearly in constant opposition to the narrative in full from the Trump side. All the Con Inc. media is opposition to Donald Trump. Doesn't matter that they agree sometimes. Overall, they don't agree. And we have these corporate media outlets totally funded and sponsored by global regime, global elites, corporate and tech oligarchs, pharma companies, etc. That's where the funding comes through. All of that is opposed to Donald Trump. So the fact that Fox News is nice to Trump sometimes is utterly irrelevant when you are looking at the overall communications program. Now, again, maybe there are ghosts in the machine. Maybe there's some degree of full control. But otherwise, what we see is action that is in direct contradiction, trying to refute the Trump position on a whole range of issues and policies. What else? That is the same thing. Let's keep going. Speaking of the anti-Trump efforts, this is an interesting one that extended, obviously, well beyond the Get Trump effort. This is the Daily Mail. From just yesterday, deep state Biden-Obama plot to financially ruin conservative Americans. Whistleblower at very top of one of the world's biggest banks speaks out. So that's a big deal. And I think that we have all been familiar with the debanking thing, people being taken off PayPal, people being removed from their banks. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but in early January 2021, shortly after the Capitol riots in Washington, D.C., one of the wealthiest and most recognizable businessmen in the world received an unexpected phone call from his bank. JP Morgan Chase regretted to inform him, the caller allegedly said, that his accounts would be closed in 20 days. The mogul protested, no doubt. He had enjoyed a working relationship with the institution for almost 40 years, but the bank would not budge. Without explanation, he was told to take his $1 billion elsewhere. Next, he allegedly phoned Bank of America. Yet they too, he says, refused to take his money. I was loaded up with cash and they told me, "I'm sorry, sir, we can't have you," claimed the astonished client, none other than President Donald Trump, who revealed this all on CNBC on Tuesday. Trump had been debanked. So allegedly were his wife, First Lady Melania Trump, and son Barron. So it went all the way to the top. Trump, Melania, and Barron, all, we are told, were debanked. Sticking with finance. This was a welcome piece of news yesterday, CNBC. Trump to nominate economic advisor Stephen Miran to be the new Fed governor, replacing Kugler. This is Adriana Kugler. I believe we talked about her on Tuesday. Donald Trump on Thursday announced he has selected Stephen Miran, chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, to a pivotal seat on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, replacing Adriana Kugler, who resigned Friday. The nominee will serve out Kugler's term, which expires January 31st, 2026. Now, Miran is the author, as we noted a few months back, of the Mar-a-Lago Accords, the World Economic Plan for Trump tariffs and the valuation of the dollar, potentially a devaluation of the dollar, all of that anticipated and expected as part of the Mar-a-Lago Accords. I cannot remember exactly which episode we talked about that in at some length, but I think it was probably in the April range. Trump's statement on the announcement on Truth Social, he says, "It is my great honor to announce that I have chosen Dr. Stephen Miran, current chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, to serve in the just vacated seat on the Federal Reserve Board until January 31st, 2026. In the meantime, we will continue to search for a permanent replacement. Stephen has a PhD in economics from Harvard University and served with distinction in my first administration. He has been with me from the beginning of my second term, and his expertise in the world of economics is unparalleled. He will do an outstanding job. Congratulations, Stephen." And so that is a significant role. It is a temporary role, which is fine. But there is now an insider, part of that inner circle, who is responsible for some of the Trump administration economic agenda now being placed directly at the Fed. So maybe a check on Jerome Powell, maybe a check on the Fed Board of Governors in general, maybe just a person in there who's able to communicate everything that they are doing in a firsthand way to Donald Trump. Maybe that is enough to bring them under some level of control for a certain period of time. And then there's also the idea that perhaps the Fed has already been brought back under control of the Treasury, back under Treasury. And it's funny, Curtis Yarvin on his Substack the other day was predicting that something like that could happen, that the Fed could be brought back under Treasury. That's something we've talked about for years. So congratulations, Mencius Moldbug, on being way ahead of the curve. Okay. Trump had a few interesting posts on that tariff program from this week. One of them, this is the first, yesterday. The reason that the Wall Street Journal editorial board is always negative on, quote unquote, Trump and the hundreds of billions of dollars we're bringing into our country through tariffs, numbers that the USA has never seen before, is because they are China-centric, or at a minimum, globalists. And they would rather see China and the world, for reasons unknown, quote unquote, win, baby, win. If the United States were not able to charge tariffs to other countries, it would be economically defenseless and of no further force or effect. The only thing that can destroy our country are crooked radical left judges, of which there are many. And so he kind of takes a different turn there at the end. But the Wall Street Journal editorial board, he is suing the Wall Street Journal, News Corp, and the Murdochs. They are going negative on tariffs. And I think that he has accurately described their reasoning. It's because they are globalists and they want the global, the one world, global, central control over the global economics, the economic system, to be globalist forever. It's regime controlled forever. And they are the mouthpieces of the regime. They are emphasizing the regime's agenda and their desires, not the people's desires. That's what the corporate media is there to do. It's there to create a false reality that, if the collective consciousness comes to believe it, will lead us all to help them create the world where they get more powerful. Okay? That's the point of the media. And we can see it right here. The Trump administration, on the other hand, is breaking apart that top-down centralized control over the global economy. Trump also said this morning, tariffs are having a huge positive impact on the stock market. Almost every day, new records are set. In addition, hundreds of billions of dollars are pouring into our country's coffers. If a radical left court ruled against us at this late date in an attempt to bring down or disturb the largest amount of money, wealth creation, and influence the USA has ever seen, it would be impossible to ever recover or pay back these massive sums of money and honor. It would be 1929 all over again, a Great Depression. If they were going to rule against the wealth, strength, and power of America, they should have done so long ago, at the beginning of the case, where our entire country, while never having the chance at this kind of greatness again, would not have been put in 1929-style jeopardy. There's no way America could recover from such a judicial tragedy, but I know our court system better than anyone. There's no one in history that has gone through the trials, tribulations, and uncertainties such as I. And absolutely terrible, but also amazingly beautiful things can happen. Our country deserves success and greatness, not turmoil, failure, and disgrace. God bless America. That is quite a statement. Are we at threat from a 1929 style Great Depression? I think that he is saying if the program he is putting in place is successfully thwarted by the regime and by the supporters of the regime in this country, of which there are a great many, all of them think they're smarter than Donald Trump. Still, somehow, it's amazing they can just be wrong for a decade straight about virtually everything and still be like, yeah, Trump's stupid. He's always being run by his ego. We're the real smart people. That's who Trump should listen to. There is significant pushback to the reordering of the global economy, and they are none too happy about it. If they were to thwart it, Trump is saying the result would be a 1929-style Great Depression, and that we could never bring ourselves out of the debt we are in. And of course, that's already true unless we pursue these methods and also stop paying the people we're at war with right now. So that could happen. And we expect that there will be the elimination, hopefully, in the near future of income taxes broadly. He's already gone after tax on tips, tax on overtime, tax on Social Security. Okay, eliminate those taxes. Let's get rid of the IRS and the Federal Reserve as these middlemen between the people of the United States and these global central bankers. Let's eradicate that entire system and bring it all back under the control. If it's under the control of anyone, it should be under the control of the American government, not some global body that we're told is just going to be fair to everybody. Okay. Maybe it shouldn't be under the control of anybody. Maybe all of our economics should be totally decentralized, and maybe we just abandon the federal government altogether. If that project works successfully, I'm on board potentially, but we're not there yet. Regardless, the question remains, would we be able to pay back all of that money without this tariff money coming in? The answer is obviously no. If this system were to break down, if the global regime were to successfully thwart it, not just here, but in other nations, and begin restoring their one world centralized control over the global economy, that would be economically devastating for America. Now, I don't think that there's any chance that can happen, but I think that Donald Trump is right to point it out. It's really a choice between, do you want the America First agenda? Do you want a Great Depression? Not that difficult. Let's take a pause. In the chat, DWV says simply APL. Very well done. Polymathanon says Trump fired IRS Commissioner Billy Long and just appointed Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as acting IRS Commissioner. So we are marching ever closer. Scott Bessent said he did not want to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve this week, despite many of the rumors that would suggest that he could be appointed to that position. Some of them even encouraged by Scott Bessent, saying that he believes it's possible that he could be. But he also said that he's very happy in the job he's doing right now and does not want that job. And Donald Trump already announced that he wouldn't be selecting Scott Bessent. But that's for now. Things can change. Wouldn't it be interesting if Scott Bessent became the head of Treasury, the IRS, and the Fed? At that point, you would pretty much have to agree that the Fed and the IRS are back under Treasury and no longer just arms of the global regime's central bankers. That would be a very interesting advance in this whole project. All right. Okay, let's get down to some geopolitics. And I want to start right here. This is a survey from Gallup that I saw earlier today. And, you know, polls are fake. Okay. Not denying that polls are fake. Polls are usually fake in a pro-regime direction. So whatever the poll describes for the public can be seen in that light. The numbers themselves shouldn't be trusted. The change in the numbers over time gives some indication of where public sentiment is moving. But ultimately, there's no firm ground here to stand on. But the fact that this is being communicated, we can evaluate it in a story-only sense. This is the public communication from Gallup about how the situation is now. The headline is, Ukrainians lose appetite for war, support negotiated peace. And the number of Ukrainians now taking that position is 69%, compared to 24% who says that Ukraine should continue fighting in an attempt to defeat Russia, something that's impossible. And then another 7% are undecided. So 69% of Ukrainians don't want Ukraine to keep fighting against Russia. Isn't that amazing? And that this poll shows how that has changed since the beginning of 2022, when Putin first launched his very brutal invasion, where the numbers were an exact reverse. It's 24% now. It's roughly 75% back in 2022. That's a total reversal of public sentiment in Ukraine regarding the so-called war. Now, Ukraine isn't the only place where that has happened. And we can see that the same thing is happening in Israel. And we will get to talking about a little bit of that later. But isn't it incredible how these televised war stories have changed the public sentiment about both Ukraine, the global regime proxy state and ancestral home of the Khazarian mafia, and Israel, the global regime proxy state and current home of the Khazarian mafia? It's incredible. And people are like, wait a second, we don't really like that much. I know that we're supposed to like it, but we don't really like it. That comedic actor in Ukraine, man, he seemed like he was bound for hero status. And oh, how the tides have turned. Donald Trump has been talking about Russia and Ukraine this week on, actually, this is last Friday. Trump said, I've just been informed that almost 20,000 Russian soldiers died this month in the ridiculous war with Ukraine. Russia has lost 112,500 soldiers since the beginning of the year. That is a lot of unnecessary death. Ukraine, however, has also suffered greatly. They have lost approximately 8,000 soldiers since January 1st, 2021, and that number does not include their missing. Ukraine has also lost civilians, but in smaller numbers, as Russian rockets crash into Kyiv and other Ukrainian locales. This is a war that should have never happened. This is Biden's war, not Trump's. I'm just here to see if I can stop it. That is a lot of death, and even more death on the Russian side than the Ukrainian side. Seems kind of impossible. Who knows? Maybe it's possible that the Ukrainians have just been kicking Russia's ass, but as we'll see as we go through this, there's no way that's true. Here is Trump post number 2, also from Friday of last week. Based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And we still have not been nuked. And I just wanted to get these full faces on the screen. Katie Hobbs and Gavin, why is this attention farmer posting this in relation to a post about Russia? The world may never know, but that's all that Trump's posts ever are in the replies. Look at this. The same attention farmer again, showing Maxine Waters. Then another attention farmer. Stolen elections have consequences. Then another attention farmer. All of these are verified accounts on Truth Social. That is very strange. Another attention farmer. Oh, that's the same one as before. Another attention farmer. Look at this. Just nonsense memes. Sorry, boomers. Boomer memes in all the replies. So there can never be a real conversation in Trump's replies. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? You got to wonder what all those attention farmers are there to do. They're just there to farm attention and collect new followers by continuously appearing right below Trump's Truth Social posts? Maybe. But is there any financial benefit to be gained from having a zillion Truth Social followers? Don't think that there is. And especially if they're all just bots who followed your account after you put it up underneath the Trump posts continuously. That is just an embarrassing behavior if those people are humans. It is the bottom of the barrel as far as attention farming goes. There's not even a benefit. At least you can understand why DC Drano and Nick Sorter and Eric Doherty are taking money to put out posts, because getting paid a few $1,000 to tweet something is pretty good money. Now, it's not got a lot of integrity behind it. In fact, it's got zero integrity behind it, but it's good money if that's what you're after. The Truth Social attention farming, though, is just insane. All right, let's get back to the issue at hand. This was from Tuesday. Steve Witkoff headed to Russia. And let me just actually see if I can get a quick video here that I would like. Where are we? I know that this video is in there on Telegram, somewhere close. Here we are. This is exactly what I wanted. Hold for processing. We are almost there. This is Witkoff greeting Vladimir Putin. Smiles and respect from Putin to Witkoff and vice versa. So that's good, unless you are a Russophobe. Oh, man, phobe is so stupid. But there are people who hate Russia because they are totally irrational and totally in thrall to the global regime. That is the only reason you could possibly hate Russia, because you've been pitched a lifetime's worth of propaganda. And many people still succumb to that, just as they do with Israel in the other direction. Witkoff scrambles for a peace deal with Russia as sanctions loom, targeting India and China. We're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. Witkoff is preparing for a trip to Russia Wednesday. We saw that. 2 days ahead of President Donald Trump's August 8th deadline for Moscow to enter into a ceasefire or face stiff sanctions. And stiff sanctions don't do anything. Sanctions haven't done anything to deter Russia in any way this entire time. They just don't matter. But the escalated deadline, which Trump cut by nearly a month and a half last week after first issuing Russian President Vladimir Putin a 50-day deadline in mid-July, has done little to curb the Kremlin's violence in Ukraine. They just keep attacking the poor Ukrainians, as Victoria Nuland calls them. If a peace deal is not reached by Friday, Putin's chief commodity will become the primary target as the U.S. will begin 100% sanctions on nations that purchase Russian oil in a move to dissuade them from fueling Russia's economy and, by extension, its war chest. And so we are seeing the potential, at least, for increased decoupling between the United States and Russia and the United States and India. Now, Donald Trump has always had great relations with Narendra Modi, India's prime minister, and seems to be in line with the same quote-unquote sovereign alliance, but the collection of the sovereign nationalist leaders who are opposing the global regime. It seems like India is very much on track with that. This could still be a decoupling, though. And when we see stories like sanctions and minor controversies like this one, we have to wonder if it is actually for the purposes, if it is actually for other purposes, and I think it is. And we will get there momentarily. This is just quickly. Sergei Lavrov last week in the Russian state media outlet TASS. Under current leaders, Germany and Europe degrade into Fourth Reich, according to Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He said this brings historical events to mind. With their current leaders, modern Germany and the rest of Europe are transforming into a Fourth Reich. The situation is extremely alarming, and the OSCE is unlikely to be of any help. The majority of statements, he went on this issue have recently been made by the German Chancellor, who has called for arming Germany, considering the return of compulsory military conscription and transforming the Bundeswehr into the strongest conventional army in Europe, probably like they did before the First and Second World Wars. He is echoed by the defense minister, who has declared readiness to kill Russian soldiers. And so we are seeing the cycle be completed in the retelling, the televised rerun of World War II that we've all been witnessing over the course of these last 3.5 years. A Fourth Reich in Germany. This is ABC News from Wednesday. Trump-Putin meeting could happen as soon as next week, a White House official says. And we're not going to spend much time on this because this was just a headline that has since advanced. But that's the plan. It could happen as early as next week. So the sanctions, those very dangerous, harmful sanctions, those go into place today. And then there's a weekend. And then sometime next week, maybe Trump and Putin will finally meet. There was a story that went out that Vladimir Putin was going to be forced to meet with Zelensky before meeting with Trump. This is Trump addressing that from the Oval Office, and I believe this was yesterday. No, this was actually Wednesday, I think.
Does Putin have to meet with Zelensky in order and before you and Putin have to meet? Or
No.
So you're willing to? That's actually important because President Putin said this morning he was pretty dismissive of this idea of meeting with President
Who was?
Zelensky. President Putin was.
I don't know. I didn't hear
For
him.
you to meet with him, he doesn't have to agree to meet with Zelensky. Is that what you're saying?
No, he doesn't. No.
So Putin does not have to meet with Zelensky in order to meet with Trump. They can come to terms on their own without Putin and Zelensky meeting first. You can see why the global regime, the uniparty faction in the United States, the neocons, and the European backers of the proxy state of Ukraine would want Putin to meet with Zelensky first, because that would give them a chance to potentially manipulate that situation using the comedic actor in Ukraine as their proxy in the negotiations. If Putin can skip over that and put a deal in place with Donald Trump, that's going to be that. And we will come to understand pretty quickly that the comedic actor in Ukraine is not exercising any real power. He is only an avatar for that global regime in their proxy state, which is ultimately meaningless. Let's continue. These are the advancements today. This is from the Italian outlet ANSA. Let's get this to the right size. There we are. Trump mooted meeting Putin in Rome in Meloni call. United States President Donald Trump asked Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni if Italy would be willing to host in Rome the three-way meeting on the war in Ukraine he initially proposed with himself, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a telephone call on Thursday, sources said on Friday. Meloni said Italy would, and so U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke to France, Germany, Britain, Ukraine, and Finland about it, and Zelensky backed the idea, the sources said. The sources added, however, that Moscow will not consent to the meeting taking place in Rome because it considers Italy too much on Kyiv's side. And we have heard Giorgia Meloni at various times over the last few years speak in support of the Ukrainian project. A Russian source told TASS that the meeting will not be held in the EU, and so the UAE or Turkey are seen as the most likely venues. Putin has so far refused to commit to meeting Zelensky, but the Kremlin said he and Trump have agreed to meet in the coming days. And that would be interesting. Maybe they should just meet in the United States. Come to Washington, D.C., Vladimir Putin. I don't think Putin would do that. I don't think Putin sees himself, and I don't think the Russian people see Vladimir Putin as needing input from Donald Trump. He wouldn't need to fly to Washington, D.C. to negotiate the end to a war that he has dominated for the last 3 years, 3.5 years, to the extent a war has even happened. Okay? So that would make probably no sense, but we shall see. We also have reaction from Xi Jinping in China. This is the National Pulse just today. China's Xi speaks with Putin ahead of possible U.S.-Russia summit. A possible face-to-face bilateral summit with the U.S. President Donald J. Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin appears to be gaining momentum toward realization. Putin discussed the matter with Chinese President Xi Jinping on a phone call today, suggesting the Russian overture could be more than a tactic to delay American secondary sanctions on Russia's shadow oil fleet. During their conversation, Putin updated Xi on recent communications between the United States and Russia. According to Chinese state broadcaster CCTV, Putin expressed a desire to maintain close coordination with China. Russian media echoed these sentiments. Xi, in turn, welcomed the dialogue between Russia and the United States and reiterated China's support for efforts aimed at a political resolution to the Ukrainian conflict. China welcomes Russia-U.S. contacts, improving relations and advancing political settlement of the Ukrainian crisis, Xi Jinping was quoted as saying. So the whole team's on board. Trump wants it, Putin wants it, Xi wants it. Those are the three global superpowers. They are all prepared now to go forward with this meeting. Now, do we know what will happen next week? No, we don't. Of course we don't. But it could happen. And if there is an end to the Russia-Ukraine war announced, that's major. And I think it's especially a big deal because we know that Ukraine is just a proxy state. That would be the global regime surrendering its proxy state or big pieces of its proxy state, and it might be the whole thing. Let's continue. This is Bloomberg, also from this morning. Let me make sure. Okay. Had to make sure that I was not giving you the paywalled version. U.S. and Russia plan truce to cement Putin's gains in Ukraine. Isn't that amazing? They're going to have a negotiated settlement where Putin gets exactly what he wanted the entire time that he also had set up and agreed to in deals prior to his very brutal invasion. How's it possible that a 3.5-year-long war where hundreds of thousands of people have died just to return to the status quo ante that was already agreed to before Putin's very brutal invasion ever took place? And during that time, we have seen global sentiment shift, not only global, but Ukrainian sentiment for the people in Ukraine shift against the Ukrainian war effort, saying that they want a settlement to be reached. Well, that settlement is going to include meeting all of Putin's demands. Here it is today in Bloomberg. And this is something we've talked about for most of the last 3.5 years. Okay? And here's the headline today in Bloomberg. Let's do a little bit of this article here. Washington and Moscow are aiming to reach a deal to halt the war in Ukraine that would lock in Russia's occupation of territory seized during its military invasion, according to people familiar with the matter. And again, people familiar with the matter. U.S. and Russian officials are working toward an agreement on territories for a planned summit meeting between Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin as early as next week. Putin is demanding that Ukraine cede its entire eastern Donbass area to Russia, as well as Crimea, which his forces illegally annexed in 2014. All of those areas, according to international law, are already Russian. And real power in the region suggests that they are only Russian. Those are the areas of conflict over these last many years. But that whole Ukraine war that's happening is in Russian territory because the entire Donbass is already Russian territory, as is Crimea. That would require Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to order a withdrawal of troops from parts of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions still held by Kyiv, handing Russia a victory that its army couldn't achieve militarily since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022. Well, what in the world could that possibly mean? If you are ceding the territory as the result of a war, then you did achieve that militarily. All of this is so silly. They're trying to make out like Ukraine has held control of that territory throughout the entire time. But they haven't. Such an outcome would represent a major win for Putin, who has long sought direct negotiations with the U.S. on terms for ending the war that he started, sidelining Ukraine and its European allies. Well, yes, because all of them are the losers of the war. They are the losers of the war. They're who, the global regime is who the war is being fought against by the United States, by Russia, by China, by many of these other countries. So, of course, Ukraine and the European allies are going to have no negotiation leverage, and that's something we've been talking about for a very long time. Zelensky risks being presented with a take-it-or-leave-it deal to accept the loss of Ukrainian territory, while Europe feels it would be left to monitor a ceasefire as Putin rebuilds his forces. And Europe cannot do that because there is no actual power in Europe. All of that power was eroded over time and ceded to the United States as the global regime's police force, an enforcement arm. Europe can demilitarize as long as the U.S. is going to be under regime control, because the U.S. will just go around the world fighting the wars everywhere. Europe doesn't have to get its hands dirty. So Europe has no ability to hold off Vladimir Putin at all. Under the terms of the deal that officials are discussing, Russia would halt its offensive in the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions of Ukraine along the current battle lines, people said. They cautioned that the terms and plans of the accord were still in flux and could change, and Russia has controlled these regions for the entire time. They have held control of Zaporozhye's nuclear power facility for the entire time. It's unclear if Moscow is prepared to give up any land that it currently occupies, which includes the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe. The White House didn't reply to a request, blah, blah, blah. The agreement aims essentially to freeze the war and pave the way for a ceasefire and technical talks on a definitive peace settlement, the people said. So let's go. So in addition, by the way, to Xi, Putin also talked to Modi today, as well as the leaders of South Africa, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. Let's return to the machine, ChatGPT. I asked the machine to prepare me the similarities between this proposed peace deal and the Minsk Accords. And the key similarities are freezing the front lines and cementing territorial control for Russia, the ceasefire, and the de facto legitimization of Russian gains. And so, again, all of this stuff was there in Minsk 1, Minsk 2. Everything was in place the same way back then, and we're going to get it now. And the war was actually being waged from 2014 to 2022, and then Putin started the very brutal invasion. And it just so happened that 3.5 years of Putin's very brutal invasion and all the drone attacks and all the terrorist incidents and all the infrastructure and all the rest of it brought us to the exact same point we were already at before that. And at no point during that time has Vladimir Putin or Russia actually tried to destroy all of Ukraine. Isn't that crazy? If you understand that the regions in Ukraine being fought over are just Russian, and that the people have voted through referenda to become part of Russia, they're all just Russian, then the war cannot be an invasion by Vladimir Putin. And it cannot have been fought in Ukraine. It was fought in Russia because, of course, Ukraine is part of Russia, and it's important to remember that as well. All right. It really is incredible, though. I understand that it sounds absolutely crazy to talk about a war not happening at all when we've been told consistently for 3.5 years that a very brutal war is happening. But how is it possible to have fought a very brutal war and come to the exact same position you were at prior to the war? And Ukraine, however, is not in the same position because the Ukrainian regime, the proxy regime of the global, or the proxy administration of the global regime, and the European backers are all the losers in this. They're getting nothing that they want. So the only result of the entire thing would be that those people lose. It's just not the way it's described on TV, period. I don't know how else to take this after watching this. Sorry, my voice is beginning to go, having done daily this morning. After watching this for the last 3.5 years. Kind of crazy. All right. Now, let's see. Oh, man. There's a bunch of stuff. Let's try to get through it quickly. I know this happens every day. All right. This is the Wall Street Journal from last week, July 28th. President Trump's tariff rollout has taken numerous twists and turns since launching earlier this year. The stakes are climbing ahead of August 1st, Trump's self-imposed deadline for reaching the trade deals. And so once August 1st was hit, if the trade deals either were in place and included tariffs or weren't in place at all, the tariffs were then set to begin yesterday. And Donald Trump immediately announced at midnight yesterday that all sorts of new money was pouring in from the tariffs. A new standard of 15% tariffs on foreign goods appears to be taking shape. The European Union agreed to that level, as did Japan last week. And again, this article is a little over a week old. But the outlook for many top U.S. trading partners has yet to come into clear focus. Trump has threatened, for example, to raise tariffs on Canada to 35% from the current 25%. If the two countries don't strike a deal by Friday, and a 90-day truce between the U.S. and China expires in mid-August, at which point Trump's tariffs on China could soar. And of course, we've talked many times about how the framework of a deal between the U.S. and China has been in place for a long time, potentially as long as 2020. Will the deal basically be the same as the Phase 1 deal with additions that account for the changes over the last 5 years that Trump and Xi had in place before the very deadly pandemic? I know it's very strange to think that 5 years of understanding the news only got us up to 2020. That's kind of how it seems. We are still very much in line with what the Trump administration did at the end of that first term throughout that last year, with all the things that we were told were thwarted by illegitimate elements of the government, whether it's the courts or, the failure of Congress or the Senate to act, doesn't matter. Okay. A lot of stuff that was put in place then is coming clearly into picture now. Okay. Where are we? This is Donald Trump from last week talking about Mexico and their tariff and trade situation. He said, "I've just concluded a telephone conversation with the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, which was very successful in that more and more we are getting to know and understand each other. The complexities of a deal with Mexico are somewhat different than other nations because of both the problems and assets of the border. We have agreed to extend for a 90-day period the exact same deal as we had for the last short period of time, namely that Mexico will continue to pay a 25% fentanyl tariff, 25% tariff on cars, and 50% tariff on steel, aluminum, and copper. Additionally, Mexico has agreed to immediately terminate its non-tariff trade barriers, of which there are many. We will be talking to Mexico over the next 90 days with the goal of signing a trade deal within the 90-day period of time or longer. Present at the meeting were Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, U.S. Trade Representative and Ambassador Jamieson Greer, Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and United States Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller. I don't know why he listed all those names out, but cool. There will be continued cooperation on the border as it relates to all aspects of security, including drugs, drug distribution, and illegal immigration into the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, where? Hold on. While we are on the topic of Mexico and the cartels, this was the major expose from the New York Times today about a secret plan. It's going to destroy everything. Hold for processing. We're almost there. Just needed to pull up the proper quotes from this here article. Trump directs military to target foreign drug cartels. President Trump has secretly signed a directive to the Pentagon to begin using military force against certain Latin American drug cartels that his administration has deemed terrorist organizations, according to people familiar with the matter. Again, did he do this many years ago? I think in the future we will probably find out that he did. It was hinted at in the first term. It was necessary in the fake and illegitimate presidency of Joe Biden. And it seems like the immigration stuff, the illegal immigration, was shut down prior to Trump regaining control. We talked about that at length. I don't need to rehearse the argument again now. But this is another one of those things that you got to think has been happening for a while. Did El Salvador, for instance, actually just use their own police forces under President Bukele's leadership and shut down the gang problem in El Salvador? Probably not. Okay. There's too much money riding on the cartels and on the success and activity of those gangs to think that a president could get elected and then just so efficiently use the El Salvadoran police forces and whatever military they might have to stop the cartels in El Salvador seems like a stretch to me. So you have to wonder if there was American military assistance there. Back to the article. The decision to bring the American military into the fight is the most aggressive step so far in the administration's escalating campaign against the cartels. It signals Mr. Trump's continued willingness to use military forces to carry out what has primarily been considered a law enforcement responsibility to curb the flow of fentanyl and other illegal drugs. And we've seen this sort of argument be made countless times over the last few years, going all the way back to that situation we talked about at the beginning of the episode, Trump considering using the military or the National Guard to lock down Washington, D.C. in the midst of the Black Lives Matter riots, the Insurrection Act, as mentioned by Tom Cotton. The military can't operate on U.S. soil. That's what we have always been raised to believe. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. The U.S. military, you could argue, should only be used on American soil, or I guess in the territory of a country we are actively at war against. Otherwise, those are our defense forces. It's not actually a military that is supposed to go around the world practicing military adventurism on behalf of globalist neocons. Okay, so the idea that the military can't be used here for any reason is insane. If the military is going to go to war in other places, this might be one of the instances of that happening. Okay, now we don't know this is going to happen. Again, people familiar with the matter, but sometimes these stories come out so that the public can hash out the conversation, and then we eventually find out, or at least get exceedingly good reason to believe this sort of thing was already happening. Now, I am entirely on board with that. I assume something to that effect is actually what's going on. Let us continue. The order provides an official basis for the possibility of direct military operations at sea and on foreign soil against the cartels. Skipping down. Unilateral military assaults on cartels would be a marked escalation in the long drive to curb drug trafficking, putting U.S. forces in a lead role on the front lines against often well-armed and well-financed organizations. A sustained campaign would also likely raise further issues related to Mr. Trump's push to use the military more aggressively to back a variety of its policies, often in the face of legal and constitutional constraints. And you can see once again, they are trying to depict Donald Trump as an authoritarian dictator. There was a clip that CanCom played on daily this morning of Rachel Maddow just losing her mind about how Trump was an authoritarian dictator. Our society has devolved, into authoritarianism. That definitely wasn't true under the fake and illegitimate presidency of Joe Biden following a stolen election whereby Joe Biden immediately came into quote unquote office and instituted the forced participation in an experimental medical program, and then used federal forces to pursue his political opponents while also censoring the American public. What can we say about all that? Certainly wasn't an authoritarian dictatorship back then, even though Joe Biden was totally unelected. Past U.S. military involvement in countering drug operations in Latin America have sometimes pushed at legal limits, but those operations were framed as providing support for law enforcement authorities. So you see, if it's George H.W. Bush doing it, and he just wants to go take over Panama and depose the leader, all he has to say is, all we're doing is supporting law enforcement. And then it's okay. Let us skip down. This is quite a long article that we certainly do not have time to go all the way through. And hopefully I will be able to find the quote. And if I cannot, then I'll just read it off of Telegram. Ah, darn it. Maybe I'll never find it. Now it's like messing with me. How can I not find it? Whatever. Okay, so skipping down. And of course, I did find it, and it's sitting here right in front of me. There are also domestic legal constraints. Congress legally authorized the use of military force against al-Qaeda after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. But that authorization does not extend to any and all groups the executive branch calls terrorists. Okay, commie, if you say so. Good luck getting that to hold up. That means military action against cartels would apparently have to rely on a claim about Mr. Trump's constitutional authority to act in national self-defense, perhaps against fentanyl overdoses. Admiral McPherson noted that the administration has pushed aggressively broad understandings of Trump's unilateral power. And again, that is an attempt to paint him as some authoritarian dictator. He is exercising the power of the presidency. We have been under national emergency. Donald Trump has called himself a wartime president. Donald Trump, through his official communication channels, and that's what we're told social media is, has also said that unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures, that the Constitution is probably not active. And that's an argument I've made consistently on this show for a number of years now. Good luck, New York Times, and people familiar with the matter in putting an end to this sort of thing. I don't see that end coming. I don't think there's any chance they're going to get there on that. Okay, let's go back to trade. This is Donald Trump in one of his posts about the India and Russia issue that we discussed earlier. This is from Monday. Didn't get to it on Tuesday's show. India is not only buying massive amounts of Russian oil, they are then, for much of the oil purchased, selling it on the open market for big profits. They don't care how many people in Ukraine are being killed by the Russian war machine. Because of this, I will be substantially raising the tariff paid by India to the USA. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And how about that? This person actually gave a real response. And so did this person. Good for them. So I guess that disproves my theory that it was every post. Those do look to be human. He continued on Truth Social. Or actually, sorry, this one was before. I got the order backwards. This is from last Wednesday. He said, "We are very busy in the White House today working on trade deals. I've spoken to the leaders of many countries, all of whom want to make the United States, quote unquote, extremely happy. I will be meeting with the South Korean trade delegation this afternoon. South Korea is right now at a 25% tariff, but they have an offer to buy down those tariffs. I will be interested in hearing what that offer is. We have just concluded a deal with the country of Pakistan, whereby Pakistan and the United States will work together on developing their massive oil reserves. We are in the process of choosing the oil company that will lead this partnership. Who knows? Maybe they'll be selling oil to India someday. Likewise, other countries are making offers for a tariff reduction. All of this will help reduce our trade deficit in a major way. A full report will be released at the appropriate time. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again." So that is very interesting. So India, he wants to stop them from buying oil from Russia and then reselling it. But he wants them to buy their oil from Pakistan. That is kind of just part of India. And the global regime, the British government, is the major factor in that. As I've said many times, I believe that all of the pre-World War II lines are being redrawn on the map, and it could extend back farther than that. But it seems pretty clear that all of this is going to reverse the global Zionist project that began 129 years ago. As Trump often says, the most important election in 129 years. What did 129 years go back to? Well, a lot of people expect it's just the presidential election of 1896. I suspect that it is the rise of this global order in this globalist Zionist project, okay? Because it ultimately is Zionist. It just is. Okay. And again, hashtag not all Jews, okay? Not all Jews are Zionists. Let's continue. This is The Telegraph UK. From Wednesday, Trump declares Russia an extraordinary threat to the U.S. And so these are the Truth Social posts. They're very upset. There is one piece of this that I want, and let me just use a shortcut here because I do not believe that these highlights would have stuck. Okay, so this is just, let's just use this for the headline in the interest of time. We will just skip ahead. This is a statement by the Indian government. And reading from this, it says, "This is no accidental balance sheet. India and Russia are building an economic bloodstream that pulses with autonomy. The river of commerce now runs through Moscow and New Delhi, not through swift corridors. Trade flows unchained from distant domination." Actually, you know what? I think that I pulled up the wrong link for this quote. I think that this is actually from Konstantin von Hofmeister, who was a guest of this podcast just a few weeks ago. Sorry about the confusion there. To finish this, he says, "From the Atlantic world, resistance takes the form of decrees and tariffs. On the same day this accord was signed, Trump, standing as a voice of a declining unipolar throne, issued an executive order imposing tariffs on Indian imports and threatening secondary sanctions on those engaging with Russian energy. This gesture, far from demonstrating enduring supremacy, reveals the reflex of an empire confronting its own strategic eclipse. And so he is not on board with my thought process and is a bit normie-ish in how he interprets what's happening in the United States. It's actually, I had this post that keeps going around on Substack about how the division they think is happening in MAGA and the defections from MAGA, like the MAGA coalition falling apart, none of that is actually happening. Okay. And these machinations, I would suggest, are just narrative elements to explain the global decoupling that's happening. They're not explaining real animosity between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, or Donald Trump and Narendra Modi, or, of course, the countries that they run. It's nothing like that. So taking it that way, I think, is probably going a bridge too far. For processing, one moment. I would like to find one more thing here. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Hold for processing. I'm almost there. Okay. So we're talking about ultimately these new lines of industry and transportation and commerce that are forming all around the world between these countries. The relationships were initially set up by the centralized, top-down, globally controlled economy, and those relationships are being altered and changed. New trade routes are opening. We've talked a million times. I just said it today on Badlands Daily. The way the global regime controls countries around the world, what the evil twin faction is there to implement is control over media, control over finance, which they have with the global reserve currency, etc., control over resources, control over trade routes, and then ultimately Team America World Police. Okay? So shifts in trade routes, opening up trade routes is a huge issue. India and Pakistan, we were told Donald Trump averted what could have been a nuclear conflict. And now they might trade in oil, and he's going to take India away from the trade that they were doing so it can be rerouted back to Pakistan. Amazing. How does it happen? Here is Reuters from just yesterday. U.S. secures strategic transit corridor in Armenia, Azerbaijan peace deal. When U.S. President Donald Trump welcomes the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan to the White House on Friday, the meeting will culminate in the signing of a peace framework that includes exclusive U.S. development rights to a strategic transit corridor through the South Caucasus. I think I'm saying that correct. I always, because it's like Caucasian, Caucasus. It's very strange. Officials told Reuters. Sorry. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been at odds since the late 1980s, when Nagorno-Karabakh, an Azerbaijani region that had a mostly ethnic Armenian population, broke away from Azerbaijan with support from Armenia. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan won independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. A peace deal could transform the South Caucasus, an energy-producing region neighboring Russia, Europe, Turkey, and Iran that is crisscrossed by oil and gas pipelines, but riven by closed borders and long-standing ethnic conflicts. So once again, Trump is resolving a long-standing conflict. Congo and Rwanda, India, Pakistan, Thailand, and Cambodia. We just heard about that a couple weeks ago. Stuff with Serbia and Kosovo. This is what Trump has been doing for a very long time, and here is another one. So what does it mean that that conflict was happening? Okay, it would seem to mean that one of those areas was fully controlled by the regime and one of them was not. Okay, and they always separate countries into little blocks and then fight over territory. This is the program everywhere. And now we are seeing that program come to an end between Armenia and Azerbaijan for the purposes of commerce. It is the centralized global control over the world's economy collapsing, and new trade routes, new partnerships being formed, and some old partnerships that were part of that global economy being decoupled. This is the big picture we've been talking about for a very, very long time. And there were times where we were the only people talking about any of this, and those times seem to be occurring with greater consistency these days. This is Donald Trump on Truth Social. I look forward to hosting the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and the prime minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, at the White House tomorrow for a historic peace summit. These two nations have been at war for many years, resulting in the deaths of thousands of people. Many leaders have tried to end the war with no success until now, thanks to Trump. My administration has been engaged with both sides for quite some time. Tomorrow, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan will join me at the White House for an official peace signing ceremony. The United States will also sign bilateral agreements with both countries to pursue economic opportunities together so we can fully unlock the potential of the South Caucasus region. I'm very proud of these courageous leaders for doing the right thing for the great people of Armenia and Azerbaijan. It will be a historic day for Armenia, Azerbaijan, the United States, and the world. See you then, DJT. And look at that. Attention farming again in the comments. An attention farmer, another attention farmer, another attention farmer. Terrible memes that have nothing to do with the post. And it just goes on and on and on. I'm amazed that other post did not have that. I'm really disappointed that I found some refutation of my prior position that it was every. But I guess not. We're just going to have to get through it. Okay. Maybe we can bring this to a reasonable close. So let's catch up on Israel and Gaza this week, and then we will get out of here. This is Axios from Tuesday. Trump plans to take over Gaza aid effort, U.S. officials say. Ah, darn it. That's the paywalled version. Hold for processing. Here we are. This is Axios. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump discussed plans for the U.S. to significantly increase its role in providing humanitarian aid to Gaza in a meeting Monday evening at the White House, according to two U.S. officials and an Israeli official with knowledge of the issue. Negotiations for a ceasefire are stuck, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is moving towards significantly expanding the war. U.S. officials are concerned about more bloodshed, but have yet to firmly object. The new food plan Trump promised last week is also not finalized. And so Israel, in the interest of time, we'll leave that there. Elements in Israel are saying that Netanyahu is crazy to want to escalate things in Gaza. Is Netanyahu crazy to do that? Well, maybe. The IDF says they just can't do it successfully. They don't have the manpower or the resources. They're not going to be able to do a Gaza City occupation properly. And we can understand that forces in Israel have been opposing Netanyahu this entire time. There was a color revolution effort and some court manipulation coming from the left side of that. And then the insane neocon warmongers from the right side of that. And our boy Yuhu has basically just been doing a balancing act to make both of those sides look absolutely insane all the time and never gain power. Okay. So that the exact process we described earlier when looking at that poll can actually occur. Since the paragliding go-kart incident of October 7th, 2023, the public sentiment toward Israel has steered, it turned around completely and then sprinted in the opposite direction. No longer is Israel seen by virtually anyone as the United States' greatest ally. Many Christians who were just raised to believe that saving Israel, the global regime proxy state started 80 years ago, was the entire purpose of their existence. Literally, that Christianity, the purpose of following Jesus, was to save the country that rejected Jesus as its foundational principle. I don't know how that makes sense, but it was certainly conditioned into belief through brainwashing for 100+ years since the initiation of the Schofield Bible Project and dispensationalism. Wow. Okay, so public sentiment has fallen off a cliff as far as Israel is concerned since the paragliding go-kart incident. An event that is supposed to, or in many ways, was supposed to rally people behind the cause of Israel, has done the exact opposite. People from both the right and the left have rejected the establishment positions on Israel since then. Okay, the neoliberal positions. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't Hamas supporters who are also a problem, all right? But what is Hamas? Hamas is a factor of the global regime, just like every other cartel and terrorist organization is, which is why, by the way, Trump is waging war on them wherever they exist, and doing so with the approval of the American people. Let's continue marching forward. So, as I said, Israel was planning to escalate in Gaza. This is from just this morning. Israel's plan to take over Gaza City stirs fears for civilians and hostages. And this is the Associated Press. Israel said Friday it will intensify its 22-month war with Hamas by taking over Gaza City, stirring fears for Palestinian civilians and Israeli hostages still held in Gaza, and renewing international pressure for an end to the conflict. Well, what in the world is international pressure? Israel's air and ground war has killed tens of thousands of people in Gaza, displaced most of the population, destroyed vast areas, and pushed the territory toward famine. The timing of another major ground operation is unclear. It will likely require mobilizing thousands of troops and forcibly evacuating civilians, almost certainly worsening Gaza's humanitarian crisis. And of course, that is something that has been ongoing. Look at these pictures that they arranged. Wow. How about that? These images. Oh, look at her struggle. See that? Food is being dropped by parachute, and everyone is running to attack it. And sometimes Hamas is taking it first. The whole story is here. So let's continue. Israel's government, the cabinet, had a vote to do this. This is the official Israeli government website. Prime Minister's office announcement from today. The Prime Minister's office this morning says that the Security Cabinet, has approved the Prime Minister's proposal for defeating Hamas. The IDF will prepare for taking control of Gaza City while distributing humanitarian assistance to the civilian population outside the combat zones, or construction zones, as they might be. The Security Cabinet, by majority vote, adopted the five principles for concluding the war. 1, the disarming of Hamas. 2, the return of all the hostages, the living and the deceased. 3, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. 4, Israeli security control in the Gaza Strip. And 5, the establishment of an alternative civil administration that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. And that is where it gets really interesting, wondering who might be that other body to take control ultimately of a civil administration that is not part of Israel. That kind of sounds to my ear, maybe I'm wrong about this, okay? But it kind of sounds to my ear like they expect there to be a Palestinian state of which Gaza is a part and will be controlled by neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority as things have been. Let's see how quickly we can wrap this up. Now, this is the so-called Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on X, formerly Twitter. The Israeli government's decision to further escalate its offensive in Gaza is wrong, and we urge it to reconsider immediately. Every day, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza worsens, and hostages taken by Hamas are being held in appalling and inhuman conditions. We need a ceasefire now, and I wonder if he meant inhumane, but he said inhuman. And so he is calling for a ceasefire. Ambassador Mike Huckabee responded, so Israel is expected to surrender to Hamas and feed them, even though Israeli hostages are being starved? Did the UK surrender to Nazis and drop food to them? Ever heard of Dresden, Prime Minister Starmer? That wasn't food you dropped. If you had been Prime Minister then, UK would be speaking German. Oh, how based and red-pilled can you get? It's amazing. Let's keep going. This is Claudia Tenney with an announcement of a letter co-signed by members of Congress, but Congresswoman Claudia Tenney leading the effort. The headline is Congresswoman Tenney leads letter to Treasury urging review of Ireland's boycott of Israel under U.S. anti-boycott law. So we need to have the U.S. Treasury review whether or not it's okay for Ireland to boycott Israel. What is the relationship between all these countries? Because we're told that these are all independent sovereign nations. So why then does the U.S. get to control whether or not Ireland can boycott another country? It's crazy, isn't it? Claudia Tenney is leading on a letter with 15 House Republican colleagues calling on Secretary Bessent to investigate whether Ireland's proposed boycott of Israel violates U.S. anti-boycott law. The effort urges the Department of Treasury to conduct a formal review under Section 999 of the Internal Revenue Code and consider adding Ireland to the list of countries that require or may require participation in international boycotts against the U.S. or its allies. That is pretty incredible that they are going to the Internal Revenue Code to be able to thwart an Irish boycott of Israel. What does that say about the relationship between the U.S., Ireland, Israel, and the bagmen, the collection arm of the global regime's bankers here in the United States? Tenney said Ireland's proposed boycott is a blatant attempt to isolate and delegitimize Israel on the world stage. This proposed boycott is discriminatory, dangerous, and would violate U.S. law. The Treasury Department has the duty to enforce the law, protect American businesses, and hold countries accountable when they promote foreign boycotts against our allies. The United States will not stay silent while our allies are targeted by hostile political agendas. And, sorry, Claudia, that whole notion is from a bygone era. And you, I imagine, will soon be from a bygone era as well. Now, this is The Hill, let's just look at this briefly. From the opinion section, this is a month ago, roughly, July 10th. Ireland will regret its anti-Israel boycott. They wrote, the first in Europe measure would criminalize the importation of goods from Israeli businesses operating in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Framed by its supporters as a political statement, the bill is being pushed with rhetoric about genocidal activity, invoking language of demonization rather than diplomacy. But beyond the usual anti-Israel bias, this bill creates a very real and immediate legal risk, not for Israel, but for American companies and investors. Now, should this be believed by anyone? I would suggest the answer is no, but let's just continue with it for just another second. The U.S. has a clear and long-standing policy position. It opposes foreign government-led boycotts against Israel, including those targeting Israeli-controlled territories. Why isn't he saying our other allies, like Claudia Tenney said? It's just Israel? No one's allowed to boycott Israel? Since 1977, when President Jimmy Carter signed the anti-boycott provisions of the Export Administration Act, every American administration and every Congress, Democrat and Republican, has upheld this principle. As Carter himself noted, our concern about foreign boycotts stemmed from both our special relationship with Israel and the broader economic, military, and security needs of the United States. And the argument against the boycott goes on. By all means, read it if you would like to know more about this. But let us just look to prior examples of boycotts. And for these examples, we're going to go to a book written by a progressive, secular Zionist named Edwin Black in his book, The Transfer Agreement. We've talked about it a number of times on this podcast. It is a mind-blowing book. Now, there are friends of mine in my audience who believe that taking the word of this author, especially in a book that has now been revised 6 times, is not a good thing to do. And I would agree, it's not a good thing to do. But we operate in a circumstance where there is only unreliable information, and we can look at this book as information among other information. This is the global Zionist regime's best explanation possible, and they've revised it 6 times to make sure it continues to be a good explanation, of the business partnership between the Zionists and the Nazis to confiscate Jewish property in Europe and then ship European Jews down to Palestine, and it was called Palestine then, to set up the global regime proxy state of Israel. Okay? So this is from the book, from the transfer agreement itself. This quote from chapter 27 says, "It was one thing for the Zionists to subvert the anti-Nazi boycott, an anti-Nazi boycott. Zionism needed to transfer out the capital of German Jews, and merchandise was the only available medium. But soon, Zionist leaders understood that the success of the future Jewish-Palestinian economy would be inextricably bound up with the survival of the Nazi economy. So the Zionist leadership was compelled to go further. The German economy would have to be safeguarded, stabilized, and if necessary, reinforced. Hence, the Nazi Party and the Zionist organization shared a common stake in the recovery of Germany. If the Hitler economy fell, both sides would be ruined." Now, where was the German boycott coming from? Global Zionism and global governing bodies within Zionism. They actually do have global Zionist governing bodies. They have a World Jewish Congress, okay? No borders anywhere. They just put pressure on nations all around the world to go along with the global program decided within those global governing bodies. And we're told, no, the global governing bodies are just like the UN and NATO, and then we're involved. So it's okay. Global governing bodies, right there. So one side of the transfer agreement describes the negotiations that led finally to the pact between the Zionists and the Nazis, as I said before. All right. And the leverage on one side, actually the leverage used primarily, was whether or not other countries around the world would collude to boycott Germany and cut off the German economy from the rest of the world so that they could be impoverished and starved until the people would help overthrow their government and want a new government, or until war was waged and settled. Let's go to another one. This is also from the transfer agreement. The Palestinian publishing company, Exim, and the new brewery represented just a fraction of the Palestinian-German business ventures that came into play during July and August. And I think this is 1933 it's talking about. As the bonanza that lay within the transfer became known in business circles. So it was going to be a bonanza. And the transfer agreement literally describes Zionist on Zionist violence, among other various kinds of leverage and underhanded cheating and the rest of it, to win the business of the Nazi partnership. Okay, so were these business deals little more than taking advantage of the crisis facing German Jewry? Or were they legitimate efforts to build the Jewish home by developing the Palestinian economy? All enterprise in Palestine, of course, expanded the Jewish national economy by providing jobs, services, products, and capital. But then again, in 1933, all nations and their citizens were struggling to recover from the Depression. Who started the Depression? The global regime and global bankers? Obviously. Those who placed the boycott against Germany before lucrative business deals were sacrificing in the fight against Hitler. Isn't that amazing? So the lucrative business deals were more important. The boycott against Hitler was actually helping Hitler. Palestinian entrepreneurs simply concluded that they could not afford to be part of that fight. A nation was being built. For now, there could be no wars, only alliances. And the ultimate argument of this book is that the Zionist collusion with the Nazis for profit was all justified because at the end of it, they got to set up a Jewish supremacist ethno-state. For real, that's what the book is really about. An alliance with Germany based on trade quickly shifted the Zionist emphasis from the people caught in the crisis to the money caught in crisis. By late July, transfer activities spoke increasingly of saving the wealth, quote unquote, and rescuing the capital, quote unquote, from Nazi Germany. The impact on the German Jews themselves seemed to be a subordinated issue. So they didn't actually care about the Jews in Europe. They cared about their business deal and whether or not that business deal would set up for them a Jewish supremacist global proxy ethno-state in Palestine. Just saying. I mean, that is a Zionist writing that. I didn't write that. It really is incredible. Let's come quickly to an end here. Only a couple left. We might get through pretty much all that I wanted to talk about today, which would be very impressive. We haven't done that in a while. Checking on the chat. I hope everybody's still doing okay. I know it's a little weird on the subscriber stream days in the Rumble chat. It's not quite as lively as it normally is, but c'est la vie. It will replay as always on Sunday. This is The Telegraph. Speaking of Nazis, everyone's a Nazi except the Nazis. Xi Jinping is behaving like Hitler, says Taiwan's deputy foreign minister. And you see that? They have him waving right there, almost just like Hitler. At his office in Taipei, Wu Chi-chung pulls out a small stack of papers titled Xi Jinping's Gradual Move Toward Personal Dictatorship. On each sheet are copies of the front page of the People's Daily, China's largest state-run newspaper, spanning from 1997 to 2022, each capturing a different era in Chinese leadership. As Mr. Wu, Taiwan's deputy foreign minister, goes through the pages, there is a notable shift when Mr. Xi comes on the scene in 2012. Okay, it's interesting. While his predecessors opted for small, modest portraits, says Mr. Wu, the image of Xi takes up almost the entire page. And we have to get that emotional stuff in there. He's talking about the Chinese president's goal of conquering Taiwan. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but he basically makes the case that China is going to expand its territory by invading Taiwan, much as Hitler attempted to do in World War II. You know who they made that comparison to recently? Well, Vladimir Putin, because we were told that Putin was like Hitler, invading his neighbor, trying to steal its territory. And we were told that Donald Trump was that, because he was going to take over Canada and Greenland. There's a lot of Hitlers out there. It's almost like they're realizing that they need to run perfectly their German program in the three superpower nations at the same time without Team America World Police as the enforcement mechanism. I would suggest that is exactly what's happening right now. So the early motion to frame Xi Jinping now as also Hitler is kind of incredible. I can't tell. Is he a communist or is he a fascist or is he a Nazi? I mean, these things are supposed to be total opposites, right? Except they're not. They're all collectivist. They're all actually leftist ideologies. So, as we come to an end, I wanted to do a Maduro segment, but I don't think we need to. Well, maybe we can do. Let's do Maduro really quickly. So we talked a little bit about Marco Rubio and calling Maduro illegitimate a couple of weeks ago and stating that Maria Corina Machado was really going to be recognized as the Venezuelan president. Here is Marco Rubio.
Well, the president makes a decision on our recommendation. Here's the thing. We cannot continue to just treat these guys as local street gangs. Mm-hmm. They have weaponry that looks like what terrorists, in some cases, armies have. They control territory in many cases. Those cartels extend from the Maduro regime in Venezuela, which is not a legitimate government. We don't recognize the Maduro regime as legitimate. It is a criminal enterprise, all the way to the various different cartels that operate in Mexico. And in between, you find them in Ecuador, you find them in Guatemala, you find TDA, what people would call street gangs, but actually are operating as criminal enterprises, but very well organized ones. So what it changes is it gives us legal authorities to target them in ways you can't do if they're just a bunch of criminals. It's no longer a law enforcement issue. Mm-hmm. It becomes a national security issue.
Has it changed their behavior at all?
Well, I don't know if it's changed their behavior yet, but their behavior is going to have to change one way or another. But it allows us to now target what they're operating and to use other elements of American power, intelligence agencies, the Department of Defense, whatever, to target these groups if we have an opportunity to do it. We have to start treating them as armed terrorist organizations, not simply drug dealing organizations. Right. Drug dealing is the kind of terrorism they're doing, and it's not the only. You know, they're also into human trafficking, they smuggle anything, and there's been nascent cooperation between them and some international terrorist organizations in the past, which pose an ongoing danger to them.
So, yes, Nicolas Maduro is the most dangerous man in the world. Here is the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, getting very upset at Maduro.
Today, the Department of Justice and State Department are announcing a historic
$50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. Maduro uses foreign terrorist organizations like TDA, Sinaloa, and Cartel of the Suns to bring deadly drugs and violence into our country. To date, the DEA has seized 30 tons of cocaine linked to Maduro and his associates, with nearly 7 tons linked to Maduro himself, which represents a primary source of income for the deadly cartels based in Venezuela and Mexico. Cocaine is often laced with fentanyl, resulting in the loss and destruction of countless American lives. The DOJ has seized over $700 million of Maduro-linked assets, including 2 private jets, 9 vehicles, and more. Yet Maduro's reign of terror continues. He is one of the largest narco-traffickers in the world and a threat to our national security. Therefore, we've doubled his reward to $50 million. Under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes. If you have any information to bring this criminal to justice, call 1-202-307-4228 or go online.
Okay. Call that number up. Help to get Nicolas Maduro arrested, and you can be the proud owner of $50 zillion. Oh, man. Let's just do one last while we are talking about the greatest, most brutal dictators in the world. This here is Little Rocket Man, and this is from last week. Okay. So the headline here in Fox News from last Wednesday: White House responds to Rocket Man and North Korea's threats over denuclearization. Jump down here. Trump held 3 unprecedented summits with the North Korean leader, whom he once nicknamed Little Rocket Man, during his first term in Singapore in 2018, Hanoi in 2019, and at the Korean Demilitarized Zone later that year, where he became the first sitting U.S. president to step foot on North Korean soil. Well, if you're stepping foot on any Korean soil, you are stepping foot on North Korean soil. The South Korea is a U.S. military-occupied proxy state and absolutely nothing more. At the 2018 summit, Trump and Kim signed a joint statement pledging to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and committed to establishing new U.S.-North Korea relations. However, just like everything else in 2020, talks broke down in subsequent meetings. North Korea did not give up its nuclear weapons, and the United States did not lift sanctions. Kim reportedly sought to dismantle only parts of the regime's arsenal in exchange for full sanctions relief, a proposal Trump rejected. By 2020, the talks had completely stalled, and North Korea resumed weapons testing. And there you have a picture of rockets flying into the sky. And that's how you know they are still a dangerous nuclear state. So they are denuclearizing, just as Trump said he was going to do with Russia and China. Why would these rogue nations even consider giving up the only power that keeps them safe in the world? The truth is, because the threat is not what we were told it was. The threat is actually just the global regime. And once they are subdued and removed from these countries pose no danger to the United States. And yes, every place could pose random danger at different times, terrorist organizations, to the extent those are real, etc. But the nations themselves do not pose threats to the United States when it is not global regime running the U.S. or trying to take over these other nations or using them functionally as global regime proxies. So we have 2020 reruns coming back around in a major way down a whole bunch of avenues. And I think we hit, 5 or 6 of them today. Just saying. We are the informational time machine is being used against us constantly unless we are able to see the effect and then kind of mitigate that in our minds and understand that the stuff we're being told is stuff that happened a long time ago. We are just kind of catching up to what the new normal will be. And my priority, as I've said many times, is to not allow that new normal. The changes being made could end up being good. But if we are still attached to the mainstream media's story, the central narrative, and the timeline on which the central narrative unfolds, we really haven't gone too far. All right. So with that, I'm going to knock out a Rumble ad, and then we are going to get on out of here. I will also take one last look at the chat. Thank you all very much for hanging out today. Thank you very much for subscribing and supporting the show. I could not do it without you. Thank you over there on Substack as well. And with that, let's talk about 1775 coffee. If you still haven't tried 1775 coffee, now is the time. The starter kit is still available. In that starter kit, you're getting the bold dark roast that hits hard, the smooth medium roast, and the Vitality mushroom coffee for clean energy and laser focus with no crash. Single origin, small batch, toxin-free and mold-free, and the starter kit includes a gold spoon clip because freedom isn't scooped with plastic, a frother strong enough to stir up your mother-in-law's political opinions, and a black 1775 tumbler, $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler alert, it is. Go to 1775coffee.com/studio and grab your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something just like Rumble does. All right, everybody. And with that, I will bid you adieu. Next week, we will, I should be doing an episode on Tuesday. There definitely won't be another episode besides that. So I will see you. We will be back on Tuesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes, I can't stand to see him in all this pain. You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you. Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in. For the love of God, let the boy move in with you. Good Lord.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.